Community School Corporation regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees for this Monday, June the 12th, 2023. You may notice that we've started just a little bit late at 6:55 p.m. We're called to order. Just to clarify, we've done recognitions in the past. I've called the meeting to order first, and then we've done the recognition right away. I actually went back and reviewed the policy, and the very first thing that we are obliged to do is approve our minutes. And so for that reason, we did the recognition prior to actually calling to order. Now we're in order, and the first thing that we are going to do is look at item 1. Approval of the agenda for the June 12th, 2023 regular meeting of the Board of School Trustees. If I could get a motion, please.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Marley, second by Mr. Wong. Any comments or questions about this evening's agenda? Okay, hearing none. All of those in favor of approval, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Moving on to item 2, approval of the minutes of the May 22nd executive session of the Board of School Trustees. Could I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Schott, second by Mrs. Austin. Are there any questions or comments about the executive session minutes? Hearing none. All those in favor of approving those minutes, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Moving on to agenda item 3, approval of the minutes of the May 22nd, 2023 work session of the Board of School Trustees. Can I get a motion, please? Moved by Mr. Marley, second by Mr. Wong. Any questions or comments about the minutes from the work session of the Board of Trustees? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the minutes, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Moving on to the last agenda item 4, approval of the minutes of the May 8th, 2023 regular board meeting of the Board of School Trustees. Can I get a motion? Moved by Mr. Wong, second by Mr. Marley. Any questions or comments about those minutes? All those in favor of approving those minutes indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0. Moving on to item communication from the audience. Got a pink sheet here somewhere. This is on agenda items. We do not have anyone signed up for that. So we'll move on to new business. Item 5, referendum campaign and renewal. Dr. Greiner.
Thank you, Mrs. Witt. As you're aware, the next steps to move forward with the operating referendum on the November 23rd, 2023 ballot requires the board to approve a resolution, develop a proposed referendum ballot question, and then approve contracted services related to the referendum process. We've got Mrs. Jane Herndon with us this evening. She's going to address the approval of the resolution authorizing administration regarding calculation of renewal of the referendum and the proposed ballot question. And then after Mrs. Herndon works through these 2 items with us, Mrs. Cronk will propose contracts related to the referendum process. Mrs. Herndon.
As you may recall, the first step on getting that referendum ballot on the November ballot is to have the percentages that the auditor will need to calculate. And under the statute, the law says that the board is to formally request that of the auditor. We found it's helpful to have the board actually authorize either your superintendent or board president to go ahead and make that authorization. So what this resolution does is it directs the superintendent and board president to formally request your auditor to start that calculation process. At this point, we would ask that the same tax rate that was approved back in 2017 be the tax rate that the auditor uses to start those calculations. The board will have an opportunity to come back at their July meeting and make the formal resolution to put the ballot or the question on the ballot, but this is the first legal step to get the auditor to do that calculation. With that, I'll stop and see if perhaps there are any questions on that resolution or this part of the process.
So in particular, the document that Mrs. Herndon is referring to is number 05, renewal of referendum resolution, and that's in your board packets. Were there any questions or comments for Mrs. Herndon about this resolution process? Mrs. Mumford?
I had a question, just trying to understand the logistics. So in the resolution, it says there's no other meeting, further business discussed at this meeting. And the meeting is adjourned.
Oh, you're looking at the excerpts of minutes?
Yes.
So-
help me understand, because that seems inaccurate. Like, I mean, do we need to have a separate meeting then that doesn't talk about anything else?
No, we oftentimes prepare excerpts of minutes for especially bond transactions and also for your paperwork regarding the referendum. We aren't interested in all the other things on your agenda. So we're just dealing with the part of the meeting having to do with this resolution. I'm more than happy to go ahead and we can strike that last sentence in your excerpts minutes. That's no problem at all.
Okay, I just
Really,
worried because it
this
said we
is
don't discuss
this isn't
anything
your
else.
legal. Your minutes will be approved at your July meeting like they always are, and that is your official action. What we're really asking for tonight is just the resolution itself to be approved, but I appreciate the question.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Mrs. Herndon on this one?
I would vote on that first.
Individual votes?
Please.
Okay. All right, so can I get a motion, please? And I'm asking for a motion to approve the resolution authorizing administration regarding calculation of the renewal of the referendum. Moved by Mrs. Mumford. Second by Mr. Marley. Any final questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of approving this resolution, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. So we'll move back to you, Mrs. Herndon, in the next.
Action board is really a preliminary approval of the form of the question. And it should be at the very bottom of the slide there, and I think you have this in your board packet as well, the timetable. And we included a draft of what that question might look like. Right there. There we go. The reason we're asking for preliminary approval of that question is that practically we like to send it on to the state, to the Department of Local Government Finance for their preliminary approval. This is not specifically written into the statute, but we like to give it to them in advance, give them a chance to review the wording of it, make sure they don't have any concerns with it, because formally, when you come back at your July meeting, we're going to be asking for final approval of that question, and then it fairly quickly has to go to the state for their formal approval. We found over the years that goes much more smoothly if we've given them a chance to look at it in advance. That also allows us to come back to you in July with a form of question that we have more confidence that the state isn't going to have any problems with. So we're looking for some feedback from the board at this point about any questions, concerns you might have in the wording of the question. The red that you see there is the places where you have some ability to make some changes. The black text is in statute, and so even though some of it may feel like it's not what you want it to read, unfortunately, you don't have the power to make those changes. Just as a summary here, and I think you probably can read either on the screen in your board packet, you see that we would be talking about an 8-year term. So each year, as the board considers your budget, if this question is approved by the voters for the renewal of the referendum, each August, as you're working with the administration on the budget, you can, at a maximum, levy the 37 cents. Every year, the board has the ability to lower that if they chose to, but it's setting it at a maximum of 37 cents. Yes, ma'am.
Would it make more sense to say it was approved by the voters in 2010 and 2017 so that we can show a history of support?
It could. We can try that. The state has never approved one that has multiple years in it. And you're not the first school that's renewed it multiple times. I don't mind trying to see if they would be interested in that. Again, you can see it's a very narrow window. Now, let me say, your question's a good one. If you think about when you walk into that polling booth, there's a lot of things going on. Most people hopefully already have knowledge about this question, right? Either they've read it in the newspaper, their neighbor has told them, they've gone to your website and looked at information, maybe they've talked to you as individuals. So we want the question to be accurate, but it's probably not going to tell them the full story of what you're doing with the money, that it's a renewal, how it's going to affect their taxes, those kind of things. So they're going to get that information from other sources. And that's where you would explain 2010, it was renewed in 2017, and we're asking for a renewal again.
Gotcha.
Any other questions for Mrs. Herndon on the question? Did you need us to take a vote? Oh, Mr. Wong?
So basically, the red things, we can change that, right?
Yes.
For example, for the purpose, basically purpose of this this referendum, in 2027, we have, say, 37 cents per $100 of assessed valuations for the purpose of funding academic and educational related programs to manage class size and to return teachers. So we will have something similar to that. We have specifically a purpose of this referendum on that, right?
Yeah,
in
It's
this,
actually listed in there.
yeah.
So that's what right now we're proposing, is it's very similar to what was in the 2017. The language is slightly different.
Okay.
But you see retaining and attracting teachers and staff, to
Okay.
make it clear it's teachers and staff.
Okay.
Funding academic programming,
Okay.
operating expenditures.
Good, gotcha.
So those are the big buckets of dollars that we would be talking about. In July, when the formal resolution comes back to the board, there will also be a draft of what's called a revenue spending plan. And your administration will have each of those categories, an estimate of dollars that would be associated with each of those categories. And then each year of you, as you do your budget, you'll revise this to be exactly how you'll spend it in that next coming year.
Okay. And technically speaking, that's maybe a question for Michelle. We can track how we spend that money, right?
Yes,
Counting.
so, actually, Mr. Reuter and I have already looked at what the proposed spending plan will be for this next July, and it is broken down in percent, the amount that we would spend in each one. And so when I do the budget, that's how much I would actually put in each of those different categories, those program codes in the budget, so.
Yeah, I asked some question. I already know those answers, but I want to ask publicly, so
Yep.
and I'm not question you.
Yep.
I already got the answer. I'm very happy with the answers, but I want
That's
to
actually one I can answer, so, yeah.
in public, so the whole community can understand and they can get the answer directly from other means or from you. So this will be increased transparency. So everyone on the same page.
When you do that each August, this same spending plan goes to the state, and it will be posted on the state's Department of Local Government and Finance website as well. And you'll be audited on it. So, and this is a different than what happened in 2017. The law changed in the last couple of years that put this revenue spending plan in place for the reason you're talking about, more transparency.
Yes, thank you. I'm trying to ask for that question, but you already said. Thank you, appreciate it.
Sure.
Yeah, that's all. Thank you.
And do we need to take a vote on I don't think you need a vote on the
I
question.
don't, but it would be really helpful if you have any comments or concerns, if you could either let us know now or get with your board president, because we want to send this into the state fairly quickly.
So I did wonder, so right now with this wording, you know, if there's not any major concerns, you'll send it in, and when you bring it back in July, if we have heard things from the community or come up with things, it can be tweaked at that
Correct.
point. In July is when we will vote on the official wording that more or less
Correct.
will have to stand.
Correct.
Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, that's all.
Anything else? All right, so I believe there's one more document in here. That would be the referendum memo. The contracted services.
So we have brought to you this evening 3 contracted service agreements relating to the referendum process, and this is typical for most places that are going through referendums to have these 3 different contracts. So Ice Miller as our legal counsel, Baker Tilly as our financial counsel, and Daler PR as our public relations firm. We've used Ice Miller and Baker Tilly in the past and in planning for this referendum to this point. We decided upon Daler PR after speaking with other school corporations and their experiences with that particular company, and we believe that they're a good fit for our team during this process. So we would like you to please approve those contracted services so that we can get started on everything. Very short time frame here, so.
Yep, we're moving along. All right. Let's start with a motion, please.
You want a motion for one or all 3?
Can we do them as a,
Whatever you would choose to do.
I think we should probably do them separately.
Okay.
Let's start with legal. The Ice Miller, that is one item. All right, so let's get a motion, please, to approve Ice Miller. Yep, moved by Mr. Wong.
Second.
Second by Mr. Marley. Questions or comments about the legal contract that we have here? Okay, all those in favor of approving, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. All right, so we'll move on to the Daler Public Relations contract. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Schott, second by Mr. Marley. Questions or comments about this proposal and contract? Mrs. Mumford.
My first question is the numbers that we've paid in the past. If you could share, so we kind of know what numbers we're working with. We've done this twice now. What did we pay a consultant when we did it in 2010, and what did we pay a consultant when we did it in 2017?
We were able to find the old contract, so that's good. The original one in 2010 looks like it was for about $42,500. The contract in 2017 looks like it was about $55,000.
Okay, that was helpful. And have you gotten more on, my understanding is that Daler wants his contract to remain confidential.
He has proprietary processes that he
Okay.
wishes to, at this time, to remain confidential, as it is a very competitive market. He does not wish his competitors to see his proprietary process, which is listed in his documents.
So as a school corporation, can we promise a consultant that his contract will be confidential?
I can promise that we aren't going to share it prior to the meeting. It does become a public document after you approve it, but he has asked us to not share it on our public website at this time.
But after the meeting, you can put it on the website? Is that what you're saying?
So after the meeting, obviously this would be a request for it.
Yes, and
Yeah.
it has to be fulfilled, right?
Yes,
Yes.
and we just have to be cautious in that if someone requests that we protect proprietary presentations, that it's, if we don't respect that and companies start to see that, there could be discussion of that when we are asking for proposals.
It's really quite similar to when we had the insurance recommendation this past winter, where I could not share the whole entirety of their proposal because they do have a proprietary process that they go through with a lot of industry data and such that they would not want other competitors to see.
So in that situation, if there were a public records request for that document, it would be redacted to remove that proprietary information, but the document itself would be provided to the requester.
So is there a way to, I mean, I guess I'm not understanding if we're trying to approve a contract that's public information, why we're not willing to share it with the public.
Because
So
he has
if-
asked me not to.
Okay, so if someone just says, I don't want you to share it, even if it's a public document, I guess is what I'm trying to say is I don't understand the difference.
But it's because I understand that he has a proprietary process that he wishes to not share with competitors at this point. Like I said, it's not that it can't be a public document, it's that he doesn't wish it to be, boom, out there on our website for everybody to see. He understands that there could be a public records request. He understands that. He just does not wish it to be full-blown out there
Okay.
because of his processes.
Got it. That makes sense. Well, I don't know if it makes sense, but I understand what you're saying, so thank you.
It's like the special chocolate chip cookie recipe or such, in that it is the unique item and knowledge that that individual has and a process that they follow. So Dr. Reiner's correct. There have been vendors in the past, if they haven't felt that we would respect their request for that, would not choose to do business with us or submit a bid. So seeking out the best possible vendors for service becomes a partnership and understanding and trying to do the right thing for their request.
I will add that he's represented 40 school corporations, including Zionsville, which actually had a failed referendum to begin with, and they came back and got passed. Probably a dozen or more public municipalities, and it's pretty serious business. So I think that this gentleman and his company have proven their value, and they're well qualified to do this.
And we spoke with him on a recommendation of a couple other school corporations that we've talked to over the past couple of months, so.
Okay, are there any other questions regarding the dealer contract? Mr.
Quick
Moore?
question. I know they have some total cost for us. I wonder if that's the total cost that we are going to pay, and or we have something on top of that. We have some other things need to pay for that.
So his contract is just a flat amount up
Pretty
front.
much everything.
That after you approve it, I would then pay that invoice up front.
Okay, thank you. I have
And then
a
if we would choose to do anything in addition to what's in that contract, for instance, if the community relations group wanted to do anything further, they could then contract to do those items and then pay for it themselves.
okay. For us, it's just pretty much one
Yeah,
package.
we're really paying for the public
Package.
relations portion.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have a question for Ms. Miller. I forgot to ask that. So what's the benefit of we have these campaigns in this November instead of next year, because the referendum is going to expire next year, right? So what's the benefit we have
Having it, going through
this
the.
November instead of next year? So
Yeah,
thank you.
a couple things. One, it certainly helps you to know that you have that renewal in hand in November as you go into the next year, as you plan staffing wise, things like that. If for whatever reason the community didn't support the referendum in November, it would also allow you to potentially come back and put it on the ballot again next November. There'd be a petition process to make that happen, but it's legally possible. And so that would keep that tax rate level without dipping.
Gotcha.
If it falls off, then it will dip. And then any increase, if you came back a year or two later, would be an increase to the taxpayers. So that's the other reason that it would be an advantage to go in November.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Yin, yeah, go ahead.
May I also ask a question about, actually, Dr. Greiner explained it a bit in the email, but just regarding the rate, hourly rate for lawyers, and there's a bigger range from 400 to 800 something, right? So I wonder then how that is determined, like let's say for a particular request, and you will assign a certain attorney to deal with it, that certain attorney has a different rate, and so how is it determined exactly?
Correct. So the buckets or the categorizations I gave you were the attorneys. And with attorneys, there are senior partners, more junior partners, associates, there are of counsel, and each of those lawyers, based on both their years of experience or their expertise, have different rates. Generally speaking, we try to have the person with the lowest rate possible who can provide the service needed do the work. That's the range I've given you there. As an example, an associate that we work with right now, and I'm not very good at memorizing numbers, you guys are probably much better at it. I think she's at, I want to say $450 an hour, for example. She's of counsel, and she has probably 5 years of experience, for example. I might have a paralegal who's been working with us for 20 years, and her rate is, I think, closer to maybe $350. She actually does a lot of the drafting of your resolutions. So that's the ranges that the firm puts together for lawyers, for paralegals who work in our Indianapolis office. We have Chicago office, New York offices. Their rates are much, much higher, but that's the range of those people.
So you will help us find the person who can do the work but not charge very high. I mean,
That's what we try to do.
It's kind of optimal balance.
Right.
Okay,
And
thank
then you also weigh and balance. If somebody hasn't done it very much, it's going to take a lot longer to do it. So are you better paying for somebody to take 1 hour to do it at a little higher rate than another lawyer who maybe takes 5 hours because they've never done it before?
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's why we give those ranges.
Okay, so you will help us to figure out the right person to do the
Correct.
the work. Okay, great, thanks.
Okay, just for a point of clarity, we have already voted on the legal contract note. Now we're focusing on the Daler Public Relations contract. So that's the topic that we're currently working on agenda. So are there any more questions or comments about the Daler Public Relations firm contract that we have open right now? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of approving that contract, please indicate with a show of hands. That is a 7-0, Mrs. Julian, and that motion passes.
And Baker Tilly.
Baker Tilly. Okay, moving on to Baker Tilly. There are a lot of these in here. Can I get a motion, please, for the Baker Tilly? Moved by Mr. Marley, second by Mrs. Austin. Questions about the Baker Tilly contract? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the Baker Tilly contract, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. I believe that is the last item that we have on item 5 on the agenda related to the referendum. Thank you all for bearing with us on that one.
Before we get off of the referendum topic, I'd like to make a motion.
Okay, what motion would you like
I'd like
to add? Well, so this would be an added agenda item. So first
Okay.
you would need to recommend the agenda item that you would like to add, and we'll vote on that, and then we would need to talk about it. So.
Got it. Even though it's this is new, so even though it's under referendum topic,
I believe it, well,
and I don't know, you tell
I
me.
don't know the answer to this one.
I don't know how this works.
Never
It
had
depends
anything-
on what the motion is.
Yeah, it really depends on what your motion is. When you haven't provided it in advance, we don't really have any way to read your mind. So what are
So
you wanting to do?
I do want to have a motion to have a work session to discuss this, which I did ask to do that in May and was told no. And so that's what I'm trying to motion for, so we can talk about more of the details of discussion items that deal with the referendum. So how would that be? I mean, I'm happy to add to the agenda. I didn't know.
Well, so the scheduling of a work session, you typically will contact your board chair, that would be me, and ask to have a work session scheduled. We did hold a work session in May to discuss the referendum, in particular to learn about the history of that. If you would like to schedule another work session, I think it would be important to discuss the timing of that in ways that would be most educational and helpful for our community, if that's what your concern is. I think that, speaking as someone, and perhaps Mr. Marley or Mr. Schott would like to weigh in here, but having gone through this process before, there's a lot of information. We don't pass a referendum without community engagement. And so there's a lot of information that is gathered and created to help our teachers and our administrators and our community and people who are in and out of our schools all understand the issues of the referendum. And so I would assume that that would be, that, well, I don't assume, I know that to be very public. So if your concern is the way that those materials are being prepared, that would be probably a conversation to be had with our public relations person that we've just hired. So I guess I'm not sure what your objective of a work session to discuss the materials that we would be providing openly to the community would be anyway, exactly. Do you?
So in April, I had asked to have a work session scheduled, and so then it was scheduled in May with the presentation of the finances. So I had emailed and asked if we could add an agenda item so that the school board could actually have a discussion on topics instead of just listen to the presentation, and that was denied. And so our work session was strictly just a presentation, questions on the presentation, nothing else on the agenda. There's a lot of conversations in regards to the referendum questions, the past referendum. For example, we had one of the purposes was class sizes. The community has a lot of questions on what's that look like, what's our policy. Transfer students, there's a lot of questions that as a school board, we need to discuss what's our transfer policy that ties into passing the referendum, getting support from our community. To me, that's not a place in this public meeting right now when we're trying to pass things. It's a work session. And so I would like to propose it to happen sooner than later so that those discussions can be had.
So you would you'd like to have a work session in public to discuss policies that are already public?
The transfer student policy, it's questionable how public people understand it, but it's to see, do we want to change it? What's the questions, class sizes? There's a lot of discussions, the spending, different details, discussions and understanding that I'd like to have as a school board in preparing for the referendum. So I would like to motion to have a work session in June to discuss these community topics.
Okay, and so these patrons from our community who have contacted you with concerns, have you directed them in any way to speak with the leadership of our school corporation? And
So a large portion of them are myself and others that have come up over the years with the campaign. So
okay, so you are just wanting to talk about your personal concerns. You haven't had community members contact you? I'm not understanding.
both, all the above.
Okay, so community members who contact board members would be directed to the superintendent to answer those questions. So have you received questions or concerns from our community about our referendum dollars?
I have not to date.
Okay, so you have not received any questions from anyone in our community about the way that we're managing the finances of the school corporation?
I have not.
Okay. I would suggest to any member of the board, and Mrs. Mumford, it seems that you have a specifically large number of these communications, that it might best serve our school corporation if you would direct those individuals to speak with our superintendent of schools, as that would be, well, it's his job. That's what we hire him to do. But I am open to taking a vote now to determine if we need to add another work session in June to discuss your concerns, but I'm not sure that's the most fruitful resolution to those concerns if those individuals have not yet spoken with our superintendent. But we can, if you'd like to make a motion to hold a work session in June, we can make that motion.
I'd like to do that. Those questions are actually questions, many of them are listed on the school's website under community questions because they were asked over the campaign. So these aren't any questions that haven't actually been brought forward before. So I would like them to, what I'm motioning is a work session so that we can have a discussion as a school board to discuss these topics.
Okay, so Mrs. Mumford has made a motion to hold our public work session in June to discuss her concerns. And so all of those so I get a first for that, please? The motion?
I think
Oh, she's made the motion. Can I get a second for that motion? Thank you.
Second.
Dr. Yin has seconded that. Do we have any final questions from anyone else on the board on the holding of our work session?
I'd like to make
Mrs. Austin.
statement. The way the process is meant to work is if you have concerns, you speak with either Mrs. Kronk, Dr. Greiner. It's not really necessary for the seven of us to discuss that as a group in public. The public who are raising questions, if they have those questions and they're on the website, then they've been answered. If they're not satisfied with that answer, our job is to direct them to the appropriate person in the corporation who can answer that question. And frankly, it feels to me like a campaign move that you're trying to roll into the referendum and sour grapes from prior to this time period and this administration that maybe it would be best to serve the community if you let them go.
Thank you, Mrs. Austin, for your feedback. Did you have more to add, Mrs.
Yeah, and
Mumford?
I don't know if I'm misstating, but it's not necessarily questions that I have, it's discussion. For example, the transfer student policy, I'd like to have a discussion as a school board, what our current transfer student policy is, what our community would like it to be, and what it is moving forward, questions on the construction. And so that's where it's a discussion that I'm looking to be had, not just answers shared, which has been done on the website. So that's the purpose.
To what end? To what purpose?
Because I would like to have a discussion and hear people's inputs and the community input on these topics
To what purpose?
so that we can receive answers about the topics and decide together the best way to move forward. I've not been a part of any discussion on this board about our transfer policy, yet our transfer numbers continue to increase. And so I would like to have a discussion on that policy and see, as a board at this time, do we feel like that's the best interest of our school district as we move forward? That's
So the
what I
way
said.
you would do that is you would raise the issue of reviewing that policy with the policy committee. We would, if you had a recommendation to change it, we could review that as a committee and then bring the committee's recommendation back to the board, correct? Or you'd raise it with Dr.
Well,
Greiner and he would add it.
I think that we would recognize that Dr. Reiner is our education professional, and he would be best suited to advise us on how to manage our census growth and our tuition policy. That is his particular expertise. Now, I believe that we have, to some degree, had this conversation as part of our financial review. Is that correct? As I recall, Mr. Reuter stood in front of us and discussed the transfer numbers and how they were beneficial and in what capacity. And that would have been the time in a public meeting we're having a financial review to raise a question about the transfer policy and the economics of that. So I know that happened. I can't recall what month that happened.
It was one of my first meetings that I came to, so September, I believe, last year.
September in there
End of
somewhere.
September. Mhm.
So the transfer policy isn't, it might sound like something we do to pick students or whatever, but it really is an economic decision, a financial decision. So again, I would recommend, well, let's just move forward. Anyone else have any questions or comments for Mrs. Mumford's motion that is currently on the table? Dr. Yin.
Yeah, I also think it would be helpful to have the meeting, and so people we can, because I consider all of us, including the consultant and leadership and team and the board members as a team. So we work together to get this done. And so then, to get this done, and obviously there might be some people who don't support it. And I guess the majority of people will support it, but maybe some people don't. And then the school board, 7 of us, and may hear different concerns and questions, misconceptions. Then we can brainstorm those issues and then to lay out a good plan. I feel that would be helpful and for us to be successful at the end. And actually at the last work session, and I think you mentioned and the current board members also heavily participated in the last referendum campaign, right? So you can also share your experience and we can learn from you. And I think, we can work together to make it successful, basically. And so otherwise, sounds like, okay, now we decide to hire the consultant, then we just step out of this without any contribution, or we just, at the end, we knock on doors. So I just wonder, what can we contribute to this process to make it work? And it seems to me having another meeting will be helpful to do so. And we can share all the ideas and concerns and those things.
I think that,
May I make a comment?
please go ahead.
And I do not, the motion is holding a work session in June, so I don't want to get in the way of the board's discussion. But I do want to suggest that Daily PR, they will work through a process of getting community inputs. I hear what you're saying about, so I think that'll come now that we'll have them on board. But I'm not suggesting that you guys not have the dialogue about whether there is a June work session or not. I just want to make sure that the board is aware that Daily PR will work with the board and with administration to ensure that feedback, that input that you're talking about, that is very important in this process.
It is, and I will tell you that that information has been much more beneficial in terms of polling and other gathering of information than any, say, anecdotal questions that might receive as individual members from one person or another. You know, the parking lot conversations, while valuable, they're not comprehensive in the way that the firm that we've hired to do that is. And I will just tell you that the number one observation I would make about the role of the board in any referendum renewal is to work together and be unified in that effort towards it. And I'm not sure that there's any other higher mission for us as a group of 7 people, is to get together and work together for the benefit of our students and focus on the renewal of our referendum. And obviously we're going to do that honestly. We're going to do that as transparently as we can, but that's the job right now. And that will be the job until it gets done, because without it, our schools will not exist in the way that they do. So that doesn't mean that we cannot disagree on things, Dr. Yin, but it does mean that we need to be working together as best we can to proceed and share common information and be united in our communications with our community.
We agree, then what's a negative impact if we have another meeting together, work meeting together?
I think the question is just whether or not it's necessary and whether it's helpful. I think that we've all received Mrs. Mumford's questions and emails, and many of them, as Mrs. Austin has kind of stated, appeared to be very much tied to political pursuits in the past. And I think there's a concern about potentially needing to discuss that in a public work session and questioning what the benefit is to our students in having that conversation. But I'll hold a work session anytime. I don't have a problem with that. I just want there to be a clear mission and purpose for that work session.
Can we do a executive session, like a non-necessary?
That is
public
not
one?
something that would qualify for an executive session legally. Yeah. Mr. Wong, did you have a comment, and then we can move ahead with a vote
Yes.
perhaps on this
Yeah, I
issue?
have something. I think probably, we have, right now we have pretty much we scheduled, not scheduled, I checked, we could talk about it later. But I see every month we have working sessions when we say we will have that if need. I would prefer to say we have scheduled that, and then in case everybody say, hey, we don't have anything to talk, and then we can cancel that. I would prefer to go that way. And by default, we will have a meeting. If nothing happened, then we can cancel that. I mean, there are several benefits of the working sessions because we are not kind of under pressure. We vote something. I mean, that's kind of, we
Mr.
just
Wong,
talk.
I don't want to cut you off here, but I want to tell you that we're going to get to the board calendar in a few items here where we talk about the structure of our calendar and what the wording is. So your comments are attached to the agenda item where we talk about the calendar. You might want to hold just a minute. Or, I mean, you can do it now, but you might have to repeat yourself when we get to the meeting calendar for the year.
No,
Because I think that's what you're talking about.
No, I'm just use that as example.
Oh, okay.
Let me say-
All right. Go ahead.
Because the purpose, I want to say the benefit of we have kind of routine, regular working session is because we 7 members, we can know each other better through these working sessions. Because in the working session, you don't need to vote. So it's kind of, we just share opinions. And then when we have this ordinary meetings, we were kind of, we already pretty much understand each other better. We are pretty much close to the consensus. So this meeting will be more smooth, more shorter. And then during the working sessions, we just talk to each other and we try to build up the common ground and we reach the consensus. And I think they will help us to build the unified board team. So I think I think the benefit is better, outweigh the time we spend. I think the 1 hour, 2 hour every month. I think they will be better off. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments on this item? All right, let's go ahead and proceed with the vote. If we're going to hold our June work session to discuss, no, Mrs. Mumford's asked for the June work session, right? The June work session would be, I believe, next Wednesday, if I'm remembering correctly, to discuss the issues that Mrs. Mumford is interested in discussing. So by show of hands, all those in favor of holding a work session to discuss that agenda item, please indicate with a show of hands. Okay, that is members Yin, Wong, and Mumford who have voted yes, and all of those opposed to holding our work session to discuss that, please indicate with a show of hands. That would be members Schott, Austin, Marley, and myself, so that motion does not carry. Moving on to the next item. I believe we are done now with everything referendum related. We're going to move on to agenda item 6, the West Lafayette Public Library Board of Directors reappointment. Dr. Greiner.
As you're aware, the formality of the board is to approve and recommended West Lafayette Community School Corporation Board's appointment to the West Lafayette Public Library. Ms. Anastasia Krudelis her appointment expires this August, and she's eligible to serve another 4 years. Director Nick Schenkel is writing to recommend the board approve Anastasia for the next 4 years for an additional term.
Thank you. Let's start with a motion, please. Moved by Mr. Schott, second by Mr. Marley. Dr. Reiner, just so that I am clear, we have 2 representatives on the board, on the library board, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, and so this is one of the 2.
Correct.
For a 2-year term, okay? Any questions or comments for Dr. Greiner on this one? Mr. Wong?
Dr. Greiner, can you give me a little bit background of these things we assign, we nominate, appoint some people in the library? Is there any background history or that kind of stuff?
So yes, if you look at the letter in your packet, that is the background information on.
Okay.
Yeah.
For Mr. Schenkel, the library director.
Oh, yeah. Per Nick Schenkel, the library director, he wrote up a letter on why he recommends her.
My question is, so how many people in that board and how many appointed by us, and what's its purpose, why we appoint that, what's the benefit, or how that works? Yeah, I'm not quite understand these things. So
I don't imagine you know the history of the board of the West Lafayette Library.
I have to admit, I do not know the history.
No.
Yes.
okay.
So as I asked Dr. Renner at the beginning, we have 2 appointees on that board.
Okay.
At some point, the West Lafayette Library Board restructured and asked, solicited representatives. Those have never been school board members. Those are community members who work under our appointment. So this is very much a formality in our meeting.
Okay.
And those individuals serve, and this one is, I believe it's a 2-year term, and they rotate, so every 1 or 2 years.
4 years term, right?
It's a
4-year term.
Yeah,
So every 2 years, we approve one for the next.
Okay.
So, and so that's my understanding of it. I am certain that if we wanted to know a little bit more of that history, that record of their board has been kept in their institution. Would you like us to request that? Mrs. Mumford?
Well, I have a question. So my first question is, who appoints to this board? I guess my understanding is, I thought it was the school board president is who does the appointees, or is it the superintendent?
So these are not
makes
board
these?
member committee assignments. We take these in recommendation of the board that they are participating on. So Mr. Schenkel makes the recommendation, we approve the recommendation. We do not solicit those necessarily, though in my entire time on the board, I believe we've had renewals.
So that was my question, is who has made that decision? When you look at the Tippecanoe Library Board, they have 2 board members from the Lafayette School, and they're both school board members. From the TSC School Corporation, they have one that's appointed by the TSC Corporation, and that's a teacher. To me, if the school has been appointed 2 positions, to me, it makes more sense that it would be a school board member or someone affiliated with the schools instead of a random community member. So I'm trying to understand why we're voting. I mean, if it's a community member, that the mayor could appoint that, the city council can appoint that.
I would
Why
hesitate.
has the school board leadership decided to appoint community members and not school board members?
I would hesitate to refer to any member of our community as random. Generally speaking, if someone wants to serve on a public library board, they would be invested in librarianship in some capacity. I am happy to go back and ask Mr. Schenkel about the history of that and the population of that on the board. I can just tell you what the history has been is that we have had these very qualified and very engaged members of our community who have served on the West Lafayette Library Board, and their dedication to the West Lafayette Library Board serves our community.
I would add that I believe he'll come and speak to the board and answer
He has
questions.
in the
if you'd like.
past.
He did,
Yeah.
he did last time, so if the board would like, we can certainly invite him to the next
He
meeting.
has, however, recently retired. So he is probably not the person who will come and do that. If he's retired, well, anyway. It'd be nice to see him, yes, but I mean, I am concerned that we perhaps vote to approve this to allow the West Lafayette Library to continue their business. But if you would rather that we not, I would hope that they would still maintain a quorum with our failure to act. So you're welcome to make a motion to table this if you would like us to, but that is not my recommendation.
When this issue come to our board, what is the criteria when we vote yes or no? What things we should take into consideration?
Well, the letter is dated May the 30th, and it was provided, the letter is dated to us May the 30th, and what date did you talk to us about it in your Friday notes? It's been a couple
I
weeks.
think it was in last week's.
Yeah.
Friday notes.
Yeah. So a month, it looks to be about a month, but of course that recommendation has come to Dr. Greiner and we've seen it in notes and in our board packet. Dr. Yin?
So I wonder whether we can invite the appointee to come as to some of the meetings to share what they do so we can learn more about this position. Because since we appoint her to do this, it's her. Oh, yeah. And then, yeah, I wonder, what does that mean? And because she will represent our district, right, to serve on that board, then how is that connected with ours?
We can certainly request that. In the past, the library director has come and spoken to us.
I mean, the appointee.
Right,
because
but we can
appointee kind of
request that the
report.
appointees do that if you would like to.
Yeah.
This is really, I don't know any other language to use than to tell you that this is a bit of a formality, that we do approve this and that we trust the library director to want people who do a good job on the library board, because that's,
I will add that it was the same in the previous district I was at, and I had asked Mrs. Crunk the same question. It was the same in her district, and so I'm sorry that I didn't have additional information. It truly, in my experience, has been a formality, and I didn't glean information from Mrs. Crunk because it was a formality, but
No longer, and then then somebody was appointed in the community to represent us.
and it typically came from the library director. That was my experience, so, and it was never questioned, so I apologize to you that I don't have the answers, but we can get someone, and I didn't.
They do hold public meetings, and their meetings are videoed on, or video conferenced on Zoom, so those who are interested could always attend their meeting and find out what's going on. But I would like to say that I've had a really good working relationship with people from all three of the libraries as far as the Chamber of Commerce's legislative, the third house has gone, and I've sat next to several of them, had interesting conversations about books, so we are talking to them, is what I mean.
Mrs. Mumford.
I'd like to make a motion to table this. My view is this has nothing to do with the individual or the service that they give. I don't know the individual we're even asking to put into place. What I'm interested in is researching about having the school board have influence, a school board member or someone in the school community serve in this position. And as I've been reading minutes from a variety of school districts throughout the state, what I have found is it's all been through the school board president. So that's actually why I haven't felt like this is a superintendent decision, that it's been a school board leadership decision on who they want to appoint. And like I said, is looking at Tippecanoe Library Board. They're a good example of using the school board members or at least a member of the school community. So I motion to table this so that it can be looked into possibly having someone within the school community serve in these positions.
It is unfortunate, Mrs. Mumford, that if you had that question about something in the role in the board chair, that you did not ask the board chair. But so I would encourage you to do that in the future if you've got a question about something that you believe that I am doing, rather than assume that I am indeed doing it. Okay, so Mrs. Mumford has made a motion that we table this. Table the West Lafayette Public Library Board of Directors reappointment this evening. Can I get a second, please, for her motion to table? That is a second by Mr. Wong. All of those in favor of tabling this appointment, please indicate with a show of hands.
Have some discussion before the.
About the tabling?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Wong.
Yes, the reasons I think we appoint somebody, that means the person will represent us. So I can only speak for myself. I don't know the person, so it's not personal, just for business purpose. I don't know the person, her background, anything. And then I think I don't have enough information to make a vote. So I think probably we just postpone a little bit. I'm not sure how serious the consequence of wait for 1 month. So, but I think I don't have enough information to vote. So that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I would say is we do know Nick Shackle, and we're trusting his recommendation, in my opinion.
That's
I don't
true.
think we all need to know the person, we know the person making the recommendation. So,
She was closely involved in the library construction project, which was about $15 million. So she had that expertise. And now she's leading the church to find a new director. So if we slow this process down, it might slow the library down, which I don't think is a good idea. And I've known Nick for 20 years, and I have a lot of respect for him, and his recommendation carries weight.
You mean the director for many years?
Yeah, I know.
Oh, and then-
That. Everybody in town,
It's true.
Yeah,
he's fantastic, and we're going to miss him.
maybe.
All right, thank you, Mr. Marley. So we currently are looking at a vote or a motion that has a second from Mrs. Mumford to table this item for further information for the next meeting. Let's take a vote on that, please. All of those in favor of tabling this motion, please indicate with a show of hands. That would be members Yin, Wong, and Mumford. All of those opposed to tabling this motion, please indicate with a show of hands. That would be members Schott, Austin, and Marley, and myself. That motion does not carry. Let's move on, please, to a vote to approve the Board of Directors reappointment. All of those in favor, please indicate with a show of hands. That would be members Schott, Austin, Marley, and Witt. All of those opposed, please indicate. I'm sorry, Dr. Yin also is in favor. All of those opposed. Mrs. Mumford, any abstention? Mr. Wong abstains. With that, that motion carries. And our thanks to this community member who serves in this role on the West Lafayette Library Board. Moving on to item 7, field trips. Dr. Greiner.
We have 2 overnight field trips that were taken between meetings. One was the track and field team to Bloomington, and the other was the dance team to Wheaton College, Wheaton, Illinois. Both requests were submitted before the actual trip, but not in time to be presented to the board in May. And so we're asking for the board to retroactively approve these 2 overnight field trips. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, please?
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Marley. Second by Mrs. Mumford. Any questions for Dr. Greiner about field trips? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the field trips, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Moving on to item 8, the personnel report, and Dr. Greiner.
So you've had before you the personnel report, and it's my recommendation that the board approve the personnel report as presented.
Okay, can I get a motion, please? Moved by Mrs. Austin, second by Mr. Schott. Questions or comments about the personnel report, please? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the personnel report, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Moving on to item 10, waiver of protected taxes resolution, Mrs. Cronk.
No.
9. I'm sorry, it's cut off of my
You confused
agenda.
me there, so.
You'd like to admit, I'm sorry, it is cut off of my agenda. Do you have a printed agenda? It's cut off of your agenda as well. Oh. Item number 9, classified staff recommendation, Mrs. Cronk. Thank you.
All right, in an effort to be more competitive in hiring several of our classified positions, we conducted an analysis of classified position rates in school corporations across the state and within our region and county. We also compared minimum rates to other comparable school corporations or school corporations that we're compared to frequently. Industry data was also collected from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The results of the analysis led to the recommended classified starting wage schedule in your board packets. I also recommend that all employees that are currently below those minimums in that handbook be reset to the new minimum beginning with hours worked on July 1st, 2023, which will be on the July 20th pay. The approximate cost of this reset is $121,000 across the education, operations, food service, and referendum funds. This is the amount that Mr. Reuter, Dr. Greiner, and I feel comfortable with at this time going into collective bargaining and the referendum renewal. All classified staff that receive at least an effective evaluation rating for the 22-23 school year will be eligible for the overall classified raise recommendation later on this year. Secondly, in analyzing benefits of employee groups, we would also like to recommend that bus drivers that are currently assigned at least 5.5-hour routes be considered full-time for insurance purposes going forward, as they frequently drive additional route hours or trips that would bring them into the full-time range. We also recommend that food service workers that work at least 6 hours per day be offered insurance going forward as well. There would be an open enrollment period for these groups in July to sign up for benefits that would go into effect on September 1st. And lastly, we recommend adding the time clock language included in your board packets to the classified employee manuals in preparation for going live with the time clocks this school year. I ask that you please approve these recommendations as submitted. And that was a mouthful.
Moved by Mr. Wong. Second by Mr. Marley. Questions for Mrs. Cronk about this? I would like to start by saying thank you. We have been hoping to get some of these personnel in particular with health insurance benefits. So thank you for making that a priority.
Yep.
Any other questions, Mr. Wong?
I already know the answer, but I just want to ask in the public meetings. Yes, first of all, thank you for put everything together. We have all information collected together, and the whole decision is kind of a data-based decision, very good. And also thank you for your effort to outreach the Tippecanoe school corporations, collect additional information. That's really, I really appreciate. So basically, also I see our bus drivers, that's $25, right? That's minimum $25. That's close to our state average max. So that's, I think that should be pretty attractive.
Yes, we'll be one of the highest in the area, so.
That's good. I think that's good.
And that's one of our hardest positions to fill right now, so that, yeah, that was the goal.
That's good. And also I see the paraprofessionals, the minimum from 12 to 15. So I think the advertising on our website should be jumped to 15. So that's great.
Feedback I've got from directors, they're very excited, so. Yeah.
So that's great. That's great. Because the paraprofessional, most of them, they work for the special education. So I really appreciate that. So my question is, after this changes, what's the financial impact of these changes? Basically, how many annually actual cost for our school district to pay for this
This is an
kind of
additional $121,000 across all funds, with the largest with the education fund being about $75,000 to $80,000. Now, that's just for the reset to the minimum rates. We don't know the effect of the open enrollment for the insurance for those two groups at this point, because we don't know who's going to pick up insurance. So I'm hesitant to give a number for that because I don't know how many people are going to sign up. I could bring back that information after we get through the open enrollment period, though.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Any other questions for Mrs. Cronk? Okay, all those in favor of approving item 9, classified staff recommendations, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Now we'll move on to item 10. waiver of protected taxes resolution,
Okay.
Mrs. Cronk.
All right. West Lafayette Schools has traditionally experienced high circuit breaker loss in its property tax funds due to a combination of the overall tax rate of the taxing district, being that we have multiple taxing entities all in our district, and a large portion of the taxing area's assessed value being in TIF districts. For tax year 2023, our expected circuit breaker loss is $1,216,530, which would normally be applied completely to the operations fund, as the debt service fund is a protected fund. The school corporation cannot afford to lose 31% of its operations fund levy. Therefore, we are requesting to be allowed to apply the waiver from protected taxes that the school corporation does meet the requirements to be eligible under Indiana Code 6-1.1-20.6-9.8. Those are so fun to read. Circuit breaker credits would be allocated proportionally across both the operations and the debt service fund with the application of this waiver. Mr. Reuter spoke about this process during the budget presentation this last fall, and that was part of the planning for 2023 was to have that waiver. Please approve the resolution for a waiver from the implementation of protected taxes included in your board packets.
Can I get a motion, please?
So,
Moved by Mr. Wong, second by Mr. Marley. Questions for Mrs. Cronk on this item? Mr. Wong?
I have a question. Basically, I think there's 3 or 4 piece of TIF district in our school district. What's their beginning days and expiration days of those TIF district? Do we have that kind
What's
of?
the expiration date of what? I'm sorry.
The TF.
Oh, the TIF district?
Yeah, TIF.
Oh, I don't remember. It's like 2000 and, do you remember?
They're
Brett?
30 years.
Yeah.
30 years.
Yeah, I don't know how far we are into some of the
Okay.
issues, but they expire at the end of 30 years. We probably have about 15 to 20 years left, maybe,
Yeah.
some of them.
There's still
So
quite
we
a few
start
years
from
left.
around.
They're legislatively set to expire. All
Yes.
TIF districts are.
So when we started those,
Well, we have one on the wellness center that's probably 3 years old. We've got
only
another-
with 3
Yeah,
times.
we've got another one on City Hall
Okay,
for about 16 million. It's probably 2 years old.
2 years. It's
Yeah.
pretty recent. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So the
and
long
we
way.
have-
Okay.
I think our total TIF collections are $22 million a year. That's what goes through the redevelopment.
Yeah, that's what my understanding.
Yeah, and that's,
So you say 22 something million is not include the referendum we collect from the TIF, right?
yeah, that doesn't have anything to do with our referendum. Our referendum rate goes over the entire assessed value of the TIF districts, which collectively are $900 million and rising. The average increase in AB in TIF districts is about 10% a year.
Yeah, I saw that.
Mind blowing, isn't it?
I saw that. So you say pretty much in near future, we won't see any expirations for the TIF.
We're okay. I mean, our referendum has nothing to do with the expiration. If they legislatively expire, say 20 years from now, we'll be better off.
Yeah, that's it's not direct related, but kind of if those TIF area came back to the normal regular tax rate,
Yeah, we pick up another $1 billion.
that's big money.
Yeah, except for our referendum, we don't see any property tax
Yeah.
revenue from
Right.
in debt service or operations fund. We
Operating.
don't see any
That's right.
increase in tax
what
collection
I'm
from
saying.
that AB and the TIF. Only our referendum fund does.
Yeah, got you. So another question is basically there's 1.2 million, that's not small numbers. So after we reallocate
Yes.
this amount, so basically we remove some from debit service, which is protected.
yeah.
So basically our collect from the debit service fund, we still can have enough money to
Yes.
fulfill the
And
obligations.
so it was part of the plan. And as you know, the 2017 lease has been used in the past to help fund the debt service fund. So yes, we are able to fund everything in debt service with how the moving parts. Yes.
Okay,
Yeah.
so in case there's some shortfalls, we still have enough to
Yeah.
cover. Okay, I think that's all my questions. Thank you, appreciate it.
Yep.
Okay, any other questions on the waiver of protected taxes resolution? Hearing none, all those in favor of approval of that waiver, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0. Mrs. Julian, moving on to item 11, the HVAC air controller recommendation for the junior and senior high school, as well as the Elementary School, Mrs. Cronk.
It's been a trend for me to share interesting things with construction here, so this is another interesting one. So bids were recently accepted on May 16th for the replacement of HVAC temp controls at the junior, senior high school and the elementary. Our current equipment is nearing its end of life and will no longer be able to be repaired or replaced. The advertisement for bids was published in the newspaper on our website on April 25th and May 2nd in accordance with state code. Bids were submitted by Havel Brothers of Indianapolis and Houston Electric of Lafayette. While the lowest overall bid was originally submitted by Houston Electric, we were notified that they were withdrawing their bid shortly after the bid opening due to it not being complete. Therefore, we recommend awarding the contract to Havel Brothers in the amount of $515,000, which is in line with the cost expectations that we thought we were going to get. So the project will be paid for from remaining high school funds in the 19 lease, as well as the operations fund for the elementary part. Please approve that bid recommendation as submitted so that we can start that work.
Okay, can I get a motion, please? Moved by Mr. Schott, second by Mr. Wong. Questions for Mrs. Cronk on this item? Dr. Yin?
Sorry. So the replacement will be done in summer. So before.
I believe the plan is to do it over the summer. Yes. Yeah.
Thanks.
Any other questions for Mrs.
I
Cronk?
know they're all ready to go. They have the equipment ready to go. It's all in hand, and they can hit the ground running as soon as I give the go-ahead. So.
All those in favor of approving the HVAC air controller recommendation, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Moving on to item 12, Happy Hollow lease agreements, glass, and the patent project, Mrs. Cronk.
Yeah, so these are pretty standard. Please approve the renewal of 2 lease agreements, one for Patents Group and one for Glass, that are included in your board packets. These are basically the same lease agreements that were brought to you last year. There have been no changes except for dates in these lease agreements. So I think we've had a long-standing relationship with both of them for quite a while. So.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, please? Moved by Mrs. Austin, second by Mr. Wong. Questions for Mrs. Cronk on this item?
We voting on both of them at once?
Yes, we will vote on both of them at once, please.
Just a quick,
Mr. Wong?
just quick question, curious. So the glass they run the 3 classrooms. So basically they use those 3 classrooms for special education purpose?
Yes, so they do have, I'm not exactly sure what type of special education classrooms they have over there, but yes, they've been using those for certain classrooms as part of the program for the entire Glass district for quite a few years now, I think, so.
Okay, thank you.
Dr. Yin?
I wonder whether we can at some point to lay out, what rooms are still available in this building, and whether we kind of make a plan for this building. And
I
kind of
believe
these
we're actually going to address that later on here, so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that'll be great because I heard before it's a high maintenance building, so
We have plans.
okay, great, thanks.
Any other questions? Okay. All those in favor of approving the Happy Hollow lease agreements, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Moving on to item 13, accounts payable finance update, Mrs. Cronk.
Yeah. Claims for the period of May 1st to June 6th total $4,706,629, including regular corporation expenses and the Wabash Valley Education Center expenses. Of this amount, $3,287,528 were paid towards 3 payrolls of wages, salaries, and benefits. Moving on to our preliminary fund report for the month ending May 31st, the education fund has a balance of $3,125,317.62, and total funds on hand for the corporation are $19,385,039.44. As far as an update, the business office is gearing up for a busy summer. We're always busy during the summer. Budget planning has started, as well as information gathering for collective bargaining. Payroll and HR, especially busy this time of year with processing retirements, resignations, and new hires and contract payoffs. Contracts will also begin to roll over shortly for the new contract year, and then we will have the we'll be working on Form 9 and then the Gateway State Board of Accounts annual financial report. We no longer have to do the newspaper annual financial report as it was repealed in state code, so we're excited about that.
Thank you. Can I get a motion, please? Moved by Mr. Wong. Second by Mrs. Austin. Questions for Mrs. Cronk about accounts payable finance update? Thank you for your work, Mrs. Cronk.
Thank you.
You make it very easy to understand for all of us, and I appreciate that. All of those in favor of approving the accounts payable finance update, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Cronk. So we've been at this slightly over an hour and a half. Would we like to take a break now for a short break? Would any member appreciate a break right now, or would like to continue on? Okay, we'll continue on. Let us start with the July board meeting. Historically, we have canceled the July regular meeting. It's usually a small agenda meeting and a welcome break for our corporation leadership and central office staff. This year, because of the anticipated pending referendum question, we need to hold our July meeting. However, I would like to request that the board adjust our July 10th meeting time to 5:30 p.m. as a small concession, excuse me, it's been a lot of talking, a small concession to our central office staff work schedule, summer work schedule. Can I get a motion for that, please? Or I've made the motion, I guess. And can I get a second? I don't know. Can I make a motion? Yeah. I don't make a motion. We do actually, because we have already voted for our meeting schedule. And so we have to vote to change the meeting schedule. We can't just do that. So yeah, that's why I'm having to go through this process. Right. So I'll make the motion. It looked like Mrs. Mumford seconded that motion. Are there any questions or comments about this change? Okay. All those in favor of changing our meeting time for our July regular board meeting at 5:30, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Moving on to item 14, that is our 2023-24 Board of School Trustees meeting calendar. As is our longtime practice, we set our board meeting calendar based upon the school calendar, not the calendar year. The proposed calendar leaves the monthly regular meeting on the second Monday of each month, as it has been this year. Given the length of the meetings, we're also proposing to adjust the start time to 6 p.m. and then 5:30 p.m. during the summer or no school schedule. Work sessions, if needed, are proposed to stay on the third Wednesday of the month, as executive sessions will be scheduled as needed, as they have been in the past. Can I start with a motion, please? Moved by Mr. Schott. Is there a second? Second by Mr. Wong. Are there questions or comments about the meeting calendar provided in your board packet? Go ahead, Mr. Wong.
So right now we have 6:30 start time, right?
That's correct.
So we are going to move to 6 o'clock. What is the purpose or benefit of these moves?
The purpose of moving it to 6 o'clock, so we typically time evening meetings to allow for families who might want to observe and for our staff who have families to still have some time after school and be in the evening. However, our meetings have been running 2 to 3 hours in length, and that's a very late night for them, especially with an early start time the next day in school. So this is just a small adjustment to try and offer some amount of relief on that balance.
Yeah, I think, no, I'm just thinking about maybe 5:30 or something, at least. I don't know. I don't know other people. I can only speak myself. I serve the board. I can come here early because those people's, the working hours, say they get off, say 5 o'clock, they can just join the meeting. But that's just my.
If it were up to me, Mr. Wong, I would make it at 4 o'clock. But
okay.
Were there any other?
I'm flexible, but we have so many people involved. So if they are more convenient for them,
I appreciate the flexibility. I'm open to 5:30 all year round if we would like to go that approach. I don't know how that works for all those of us with day jobs. So.
Yeah, there's Brian Marley. I know he has worked for the banks. That's
So that's why we tried to pick a number, a change that would just perhaps work in between everyone's professional and personal needs.
But I'm flexible. And another thing, as I said earlier, just the working session, whether or not we can talk about that, think about that, whether or not we can make that by default, we have that meeting, and then later on, if we agree, I really agree, hey, we have nothing this month, very, very good, and then we can skip that. So I think that probably better off, but that's just my suggestion, so, thank you.
Well, this is a good time to make that suggestion as well. If you would like to consider changing the language, it says as needed, scheduled as needed. If you would like to make it scheduled regularly, this would be the time to make that recommendation in the meeting. Yeah. Okay. I have no idea what order.
We can think about this and then we can make a motion. These are our board issues, we don't need that urgent, so maybe we can think about that and then we can do
So
that later.
you would, if you want to proceed with that now, you would make a motion to change that language on the calendar now, and then we would vote on that motion, and then we would vote on the time motion. So do you want to make a motion to add, to remove the words, as I understand it, to remove the as scheduled as needed and change it to just strike those
By
words?
default, we have that meeting and
Right.
then if we want make that more,
Right.
we still have flexibility.
So would you like to make that motion?
Yes, I'm going to make that motion.
Okay. Do we have a second on that motion? Mrs. Mumford has seconded that motion. Are there any other questions for Mr. Wong about the motion to remove as needed? Mrs. Mumford?
I think this would help with our meetings. If you look at several of our items, they're information only or verbal discussions. As I've been studying other school districts, it's very common to have a work session and just have discussions so that these regular school board meetings are more about voting on items and not having just discussions. So I think this would be an added benefit for all involved to have both these meetings so that this one doesn't have to go so long.
Okay. Dr. Yin?
So if we have more likely to have regular work sessions, and should we have that before the regular board meeting, or right now they are all scheduled after the regular board meetings? So I just wonder what will make more sense, like before the regular board meetings or after? That's my first question. The second is June 19 actually is a national holiday, so we may avoid having meeting on that day.
Is it Juneteenth on the 19th? We can change the June 19th meeting if you would like to.
We gotta do.
Correct, right. So, I'm aware.
Okay, just checking. Trying to keep you on track.
Thank you. Okay. So we, at this point, have 3 changes to the calendar that are proposed. One of them is proposed as part of the original motion, and that is to move the time to 6 p.m. The second motion on the table is to strike the words "as needed," and the third motion on the table is to reschedule our, that isn't motioned yet, but we presume it will be, to change the June 19th meeting. Thank you for noticing that, Dr. Yin. Okay.
And
June 19 this year or 2023?
Yeah, okay. I need to look at the, I'm not looking at
Oh,
the,
sorry. Yeah, I
23
didn't
or
check.
24?
Yeah, I didn't check it.
pardon me?
That change. Yeah, that change every year, so it may be.
Correct.
Yeah, that may be different. Sorry, my bad. So may not be the holiday day.
Does anybody?
So we need to check that.
I would suggest this, given that we already have it, let us go ahead and, okay, so it is Wednesday, June 19th of 2024 would be our work session scheduled for that day. Okay, so we have 3 things that we want to try and resolve here. Let's resolve 2 of them and then come back to Juneteenth, please. The first one is to resolve Mr. Wong's recommendation that we strike the words "as needed." Are there any more questions about that? This would result in us having regularly held work sessions on the 3rd Wednesday, or regularly held work sessions. Let's pause it there. Okay. And that we would cancel them as needed. Okay. Can we please take a vote on that item?
I actually have a question. Who's
Okay.
going to decide if they need to be canceled? Are we going to vote on that, whether we're going to hold the meeting? Or?
Well, then it would be the benefit of holding the work sessions after our regular meeting so we could determine if one was necessary. So,
The other thing I'm a little worried about is the workload that we're committing staff to, which I haven't heard from staff yet. But there's a lot that goes into this meeting in and of itself. So a little bit worried about that, resources.
Correct. The reality is that in the past year, we have held very few work sessions. We have conducted the business here. A work session is another evening meeting for central office and for anyone in the community who would like to come and observe it. So that is another factor to be considered for sure. Any other questions or comments on the as needed part? Dr. Yin?
Can we kind of combine the work session with the regular? I remember some of our work sessions is like right before the regular or something like that.
Some school corporations do that, where they hold a work session and then they convene briefly and then they come back and hold their regular meeting immediately after. That will make a very long night based on our current pattern of meetings. I mean, we still probably have another hour ahead of us if I had to guess, Dr. Yin. So that's the trade-off here. I mean, I for my opinion on this is that it would behoove us to find ways to make our meetings more efficient. So some of the discussions that have had to happen tonight have been a result of questions not being asked in advance or those types of things. And so an inefficient meeting doesn't just necessarily mean you should schedule another meeting. And so that's kind of where my question is. Mr.
Yeah,
Wong.
another thing, so we can maybe just try, say, 4 months, quarter or 3 months, and see, we'll make that by default, and then we'll see later, say, 3 months later or something, maybe by next year, we don't make a 1 year decision, we make half years or maybe 4 months decisions, and then we'll see what's going on, and then that will be more flexible.
Well, what I would suggest to you is that we put the calendar in place so that people in our community know it's going to happen and can count upon that.
Okay.
And then if we need to change the calendar midway through the year, we could bring that up as an agenda item to change the calendar. So we always have the ability to change our own calendar if we need to do that. It's just something we try and avoid doing so our community can know what we're doing. It's a matter of transparency. Dr. Greiner, do you have any thoughts on this at all?
So, well, are you asking me to say what I would do?
Yes, I would like to know what you would do because this is your area of expertise.
We will hold a board work session when the board deems it necessary. So the current language allows us to hold that meeting, and we will do that if you deem it as a board necessary. If we can cover it in Friday notes and answer your questions in advance, I'm always willing to do that. Example, I didn't realize there were lots of questions about the library board, and I feel like in some ways, maybe I let the board down. I didn't realize there were questions. I would have asked Nick or a representative if he's since retired, because we had talked about it when he submitted it, and I would have had him come speak with you guys. Or I would have answered additional questions.
Yourself.
Well, I'm just telling you that I will own that. It's been bothering me tonight.
I don't think that.
So I'm willing to own that. But my point is,
We bother you enough. Don't let things.
Yeah, that's,
we will hold a work session when the board tells us to. If we don't need one, it's wonderful not to have one. And so if the current language allows the board to hold work sessions when we do need them, we're happy to go that route. But if the board, we're here to serve is my point. So
Always.
either way, we'll make this work.
We know that about you. Thank you for that. So I would like us to just please go ahead and take a vote on this. The current vote is if we need to strike the language as needed from our calendar, or if we can just proceed with it as needed and then hold that meeting as needed, as Dr. Greiner has just described to us. So all of those in favor of striking the words as needed from our meeting calendar, please indicate with a show of hands. Okay. That would be members Wong and Mr. Wong and Mrs. Mumford, who have voted yes. All of those opposed to striking the words as needed and leaving them in place, please indicate with a show of hands.
Yeah, sure. So if we remove it, that means by default, we will have meetings.
That's correct. That's correct.
And we also going to talk about the meeting time.
right? So these are two different issues.
Another concern I have is if we are going to have for the meeting, one is the workload issue, and another is the cost for the district. That will double the cost for the school board, right? So if I remember,
Yep.
so people are paid by meetings, and then if the meetings are connected, they will be paid less. So that will save the district the money if we. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not sure how.
This is why it needs to take so long, because we're trying to vote, and we're still making comments. We've moved on to vote, and now we've bastardized the vote with more comments. I mean, it's.
Correct.
That's
So.
why these last 3 hours, they're inefficient.
That's correct. This is the efficiency issue. So what I would say to you is if anyone in this room on this board had a question about the calendar that was presented to every board member in advance of the meeting, then you would have submitted those questions. And we would have known perhaps there's a problem, and we would have been able to steer this conversation in some way so that every board member had the ability to make sure a great question made it onto our agenda. But those questions are not provided in advance, and that is why we are sitting here talking about our meeting agenda with still no vote 20 minutes later. No, I understand that your nature of your concerns, and I believe you that you're very well intended. I understand what you're saying about controlling costs and how we schedule and being efficient, and I really appreciate those values that you're bringing, Dr. Yin, but we need to finish our vote here as well. So my question to you all, and we're going to have to revote. Right now, the only item we are voting on is do we want to strike the words as needed? Mr. Wong has made a recommendation. He's made a motion. It has been seconded by Mrs. Mumford. Are we going to strike the words as needed from our calendar as proposed? All of those in favor of striking those words, please indicate with a show of hands. No.
Questions before the meeting, and at that time I didn't have questions about this agenda, but when other board members raised the questions, I think about those questions, then I have new questions, and before I vote, I need to figure out the answer to those questions. I think that's reasonable.
So,
what you said, it sounds like I didn't ask a question earlier. Now I all of a sudden I start to ask questions, kind of.
I'm sorry, Dr. Yin, I must have
understand
misunderstood
why you
you.
said what you
If at any point in time you are being asked to vote on an item and you do not feel you have, and this is any member, if any member does not feel they have adequate information on which to place their vote, then their role in that vote is to abstain. That is the purpose of an abstention. So you can either vote yay or nay or abstain, and if you have remaining questions, then you can abstain. But right now, your fellow board member, Member Wong, has made a motion. It has been seconded, and we have to vote on that motion. As the board chair, I don't have any choice other than to vote on that motion. I have to follow the process. So that's the process. And then if you want to make a motion to put something else on there, you can do that. But we have to conclude, we owe it to Member Wong and his question and his motion to vote and resolve it. Okay? So all of those in favor of striking the words as needed on the board calendar for 23-24, please indicate with a show of hands. Okay. Member Wong and Member Mumford have voted in favor of striking those words. All of those opposed to striking those words and leaving our meetings as needed schedule, please indicate with a show of hands. That would be members Marley, Schott, Austin, and Witt. All of those who abstain on this item, that would be Member Yin. Dr. Yin has abstained. That motion carries, and we will leave the words scheduled as needed on our agenda. We're going to move on now to, I don't even know where to begin. With the timing of our meeting, that's another issue. Why don't we just go ahead and resolve that issue? And moving our meeting time from 6:30 p.m. as it currently exists to 6 p.m. to offer some relief on our schedule. That has already been moved and seconded, so could I get a show of hands, please? All of those in favor of moving our time from 6:30 to 6 p.m., please indicate with a show of hands. Okay, that is all members. That item carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. We now are looking at our almost complete calendar for 23-24. Are there any other motions that anyone would like to make about the calendar? Dr. Yin?
If we are going to have regular work meetings, I would propose that we put that together with the regular board meeting. So they are connected to save money for the district and also to kind of make the workload hopefully a little bit lower.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Yin has made a motion to move the work session to immediately prior to our regular meeting. Presumably that would be a 5 p.m. start time, an hour start time before our regular meeting start time for a work session. Can I get a second for Dr. Yin's motion? A second by Mr. Wong. Are there any discussions or questions about the prospect of moving our work session to an hour prior to our regular meeting time on the same night? Dr. Greiner, would you like to give us your opinion on doing that process?
I think combining them could make sense. I question, you'd have to look at board policy, would they still be two different meetings? It seems like they may be two different meetings regarding pay. I don't know the answer.
They're
to that.
not. Our
Is that right?
compensation is any meetings held on the same night or a
Good.
single
All right, I just didn't
compensation.
want to say that I knew that answer without us
that is
looking at it.
correct.
So you know, so that's great. I think for us, it could make sense to do
I would
that.
just ask like what type of things would be covered. In my experience, I'm used to a board work session. We actually do what we have been doing tonight, where we always shared information about what we were going to talk about at the next board meeting. So this would be new territory for me. So
Yes,
the only question
and
I
I guess I'm assuming, Michelle, that would be the purpose of this, one. And two, I would hope that we would still get the questions in advance like we do now, so that we are ready and prepared to truly give you as a board the information that you need to feel prepared for that board meeting.
Any other questions?
We're voting if needed, 5 o'clock. That's not.
That's correct. It's still
negotiable time.
if needed at 5 o'clock prior to the regular meeting rather than on the third Wednesday. Mr. Wong?
So in case we don't need that meeting, for example, some days we think we don't need that working session, we can start as regular.
That
We
is-
have that flexibility.
That is correct. So it would still, we voted to have it be as needed. So it would be scheduled as needed.
Yeah, I think this may be a better compromise. So we have the meetings, we can meet together, and also we put them combine one meetings. So I think this may be better off.
Okay.
Be better off.
Thank you
yes.
for your, thank
Yeah,
you.
thank
Any
you.
other comments? Mrs. Austin?
Would it be useful to the central office if we had a work session? Well, you guys are like Wednesday through Friday, you're still working on the packet, so maybe like Thursday night. Would that be so that people can ask their questions in person? Is that something that would be, or would that just create more work and stress and headache? You know?
that's actually what I am used to.
That's what you're used to, yeah. When the packet comes out, everybody gets a chance to look at it, you come in and
Or the
ask your
packet may
question.
not necessarily all be completely out, but we can
Right.
at least present to you what we are I would just speak my previous experience. We would talk to the board members about, this is what we're going to be bringing to you. This is how we arrived at that. Maybe do a little training session on like purchasing or something like that to lead to, this was our recommendation. That's what we use them for. And they were the week prior to the board meeting.
But the question was, were we going to combine them?
Right.
Could I make a recommendation? Because I'm always a little bit hesitant when we're in a situation where we're asking different members of our central office and our leadership to make decisions on the spot. So what do we feel about approving our board calendar? And I want to return to Dr. Yins, but I would like to suggest that maybe we vote to approve this calendar as changed, and then we, as part of our vote, asked for a recommendation to come from our leadership at our next meeting, so we can have a conversation again about this calendar once they've had time to kind of discuss what might they be best suited to do. Could we perhaps consider that? Okay. So we need to follow through and a vote with Dr. Yin's recommendation to move the work session immediately previous to the meeting at 5 p.m. prior. Dr. Yin.
If we are going to give the central office more time to figure out which way is more appropriate, then I will withdraw my proposal because I want to make I don't want to make a proposal that make their work harder. And because I just based on my earlier and Mr. Brad, so Brad said, Mr. Marley said you added the workload for them, and so I said, okay, then let's reduce the workload for them. But if but Michelle said something different, then there might be. I like what you said. Don't make people make a decision on spot. Then why don't we table it and decide the next time after we figure out what's the best fit. Maybe you also want to talk to building principals, right? So to figure out what's the best arrangement for them and for teacher union and so on. And so I think it will be helpful to do that. I want to hear more. So,
thank you for your generosity in withdrawing that motion. I would suggest to you that minimally we need to, I would like to proceed with a vote, but a vote with on the calendar as presented, but with a caveat that we will review it again in July. The reason for that is to allow people to tentatively set their calendars for our regular meetings. Those are important things that we do, and we know the regular meeting will stay the same as we have voted on in this evening. So if that is acceptable to you, I would like us to proceed with the vote. The changes that we have made so far, just to recap, is that the only change that would appear on the calendar as it exists right now is that our meeting time would change to 6 p.m. And everything else has remained the same on what was proposed, but that we would plan to bring this forward again in July to discuss hear a recommendation from our leadership about what might fit for them. We're feeling okay about that? Okay. So that motion's actually already on the table. Let's take a vote on approving our agenda with the one caveat for review next month. Okay?
So we just vote for the regular meeting time.
We are going to vote for the presentation that's given to us right now. So what's in our board packet, we will vote for that. And that does include our current work sessions as they are. But then we will ask for a revision of that. And so in our next meeting, we would take a revised calendar based upon their recommendation. Okay. Does that
So it's
work for
kind
you?
of like a tentative schedule or something?
Yes. Right. Tentative's a good word for it. Okay. All those in favor of approving the calendar, please indicate with the show of hands. That motion carries 7-0, Mrs. Julian. Thank you. All right. Discussion of the policy vendor. So as mentioned in the last month's regular meeting, we requested a price quote and service information from our legal counsel, Church, Hiddle, and Antrim, to provide service in addition to our established retainer agreement for support in developing and maintaining our school corporation bylaws and policy. As you are all aware, we currently contract with Neola for this service. In considering the complexity of the review process and timeline, it is my recommendation that we review this content individually and be prepared for it to be on our regular meeting agenda in November, following the anticipated operating referendum election cycle. We will be better positioned to make an informed decision at that time, and we'll be in a better position to give any change to our policy process more focus and attention. This timeline will work out well for a vote in our December meeting, and if approved, an onset of work in January. So to this end, I've asked Mrs. Julian to place the quote information in a folder on box labeled Policy Vendor Review. In that is the comparison, and that quote does contain proprietary information and is considered to be confidential. So that process, this will amount to an overhaul of all of our policy structure. And in that quote does include some reference schools, does include an explanation of the policy and review. having been and in the group who did the policy, the last major policy overhaul, it is a very time-intensive process. And so I'm very concerned about trying to do that at the same time that we're also trying to do an operating referendum. I'm not convinced that we can give it our due diligence. Every policy then has to come to a meeting for review and vote, and a double vote, and that's a lot of time and effort and reading. So it is my recommendation, given the timeline with referendum, that we consider doing that. And all of that information is available on Box and will be released out after the meeting. I just wanted an opportunity to explain to you what it is before it got released out there. So there is not a vote on this one, but I'm interested in your feedback if you feel this timeline is acceptable or if you'd rather see something else. Anybody, any questions or thoughts on it? Thank you, Mr. Marley.
Yeah.
Mr. Wong?
A quick question regarding how, because we have a lot of policies, do we have a schedule to maintain the policy? Basically, for example, some policies say we make that in 90s, it's too old, so that needs to be repealed, and some need to be updated because new regulations, whatever, new conditions, new situations. So do we have a schedule, or what is the procedures we will follow to?
Well, so we don't have any policies in place from the 90s because we've gone through a revision since that time.
Just for example.
We do have a regular rotation of review through Neola, and those are typically based on legislative changes, which are many. But they're also based upon needs, so we sometimes will, as a board, determine that there's a policy that needs to be changed. We could receive that information or request from a community member. We could make that change based on some experience that we've had that's unique to our school corporation or some goal or mission. And so any of those things could initiate a change to policy, but there is a regular schedule for that through Neola, our current vendor. This action that I'm recommending is that we essentially suspend any revision. We don't have any that we believe require review prior to the first of the year. And this work with Church, Hiddle, and Antrim would be a complete overhaul in how we handle our policy and what our policy structure looks like. So it would be a lengthy conversation and review, and it would also include a model for routine review and changes as recommended. It's just changing our vendor for that.
So you talking about we are going to options of this kind of policy service, Neola, or maybe our legal consultant.
That's
Okay.
correct. And
Do
our
we have
legal, there's some nice kind of lineup between having our legal counsel do this part of the work because they obviously can advise us and take advantage of some synergy there. So it's worth considering, but all of that information, the full proposal is in Box, and it is my hope that everyone will just take time to review that proposal and look at some of the reference policies and decide if how you might like to vote or what information you would need an additional to form an opinion to vote.
Okay.
With the legislative window recently closing, though, there very well could be some
Right.
updates that we're going to need to do that are very time sensitive. And it doesn't mean, though, we still couldn't take those and transfer that if the board were to elect to go
That's correct.
in January. Yeah, but so we may still be coming, Mr. Wong,
Right.
Okay.
to the board to make some revisions to our current policies.
We're not terminating the relationship with our current provider, so we'll still receive that information
Okay.
from them. We're not going to go without that advisement, but
We think about different
we're
options.
thinking about different options.
So
Correct.
we will take into consideration the cost, right? Yeah.
Yes, that is part of the
Okay.
conversation.
Okay, thank
Absolutely.
you. That's all.
Any other comments or questions about that? Okay. We're going to move on to item 15. And if you could, Mr. Hamilton, put that exhibit up there. So as you're all aware, we have provided the YouTube generated transcripts for the board for review. They were in this month's packet materials, so you can take a look at that. And aside from being affirmed in the fact that I say and a lot, there is, just able to see word for word what was precisely said during the meeting. And so first, I'd like to take a look at the currently effective policy that we have in place. We have had this policy, as it's listed in our open policies, and our current minutes reviewed by legal counsel 2 times, actually, and we have confirmed that this policy in our current practice does meet or exceed the legal requirements for open meetings held in public. So in that second paragraph, it really outlines what exactly needs to be in our minutes. This is our policy currently on the books. So in additional information, I've pulled some side-by-side text comparisons for the board's consideration with regard to any consideration of revision to our current policy to allow for members to submit their commentary and written statement as part of the official meeting minutes. So as you'll recall, last month we did that. We allowed and we voted to allow a member's commentary to be added to our meeting minutes. And I wanted to just give the board an opportunity to review what that might look like if we were to proceed with allowing commentary in our minutes. So Mr. Hamilton, if you could please give me item number 1. Fortunately, we don't have to guess at what commentary Mrs. Mumford has provided regular commentary about meetings. And so we can do a side-by-side comparison. So the actual transcript spoken, Dr. Greiner, could I ask you please to reach out to, that was translated by Mrs. Mumford as Witt directed Greiner, or students who have disabilities, so that we as a board may grow in our ability to communicate about all of our students in a way that is respectful of their dignity, was changed to Witt announced that the board needs training on use of appropriate language. And so in this case, you can see that a change in few of just 1 or 2 words, in this case from requested to directed, can change the tone and meaning of what was said entirely. The third column are the official meeting minutes of this exchange, where you can see in that neutral language the words discussion ensued. So I've highlighted those in yellow for you to take a look at, but that really is where you begin to have a question about how just a simple small change can really change the content versus the neutral minutes example. If you could scroll down, please, to Mr. Hamilton, to the next one. So in this example too, this kind of outlines that need for that accuracy and content in minutes. So in the left-hand column, or column number 1, is the transcript of Mr. Wong's comments from our April meeting discussion on whether or not the 2 policies designated for a single reading should instead fall under the 2 reading process. So in blue are the words that he actually said during the meeting on this topic. In column 2 is the commentary that Mr. Wong submitted to be added to the official minutes. So the statement submitted by Mr. Wong to the official record does not actually match the content of what he stated on the matter. As you can see, it is in blue on both columns. In fact, it more closely resembles a combination of comments made by Mrs. Mumford and Dr. Yin during the meeting. However, items 2 and 3 on the list of commentary were not actually said at any point in time during the meeting. So truly, items 2 and 3 were not spoken during the meeting. They were content that Mr. Wong wanted us to add into the meeting, which is by definition commentary. Now, I do want to applaud you, Mr. Wong, in a very neutral language and tone that you've used in your wording. And I also want to point out to you that at any point in time, you could have spoken those words during the meeting itself, and they would have become a part of the transcript of what was spoken. So, Mr. Hamilton, if you would scroll down now to the third opportunity we have. If we decide as a board that we want to include member commentary in our minutes, we should also consider by what means we would correct this commentary, and if we want to put ourselves in a position to discuss comments made by individual members of the board in our public meetings for the purpose of including them in our formal minutes. So in column 1 is an example of language used by Mrs. Mumford in her commentary of the February meeting. So she did distribute this language publicly to the community via her personal website. And this particular commentary that she gave resulted in a significant amount of negative communication to the board from our community, and in particular, the teacher group affected. So in purple is her original comment. And in red is the comment that she sent to me as the corrected comment, and both the original comment and the corrected comment resulted in negative community feedback. In the second column, you can see my email response to Mrs. Mumford with regard to that being her personal communication or personal correspondence. The difficulty is if we allow members to submit commentary to our official meeting minutes, we run the risk then of needing to resolve if there are problems or concerns about that commentary or corrections that need to be made, if we then as a board need to make those corrections in our meetings, and how we might do that, and if we want to be in a position to discuss the validity of a member's opinions in a meeting. And then finally, Mr. Hamilton, if you could scroll down to the last one. In this example 4, I offer you a side-by-side comparison to consider the implications of potentially misleading or dishonest content or inference to be added if we allow addition of commentary to official meeting records. So in column 1 is the transcript of Dr. Yin's engagement report from the May regular meeting. In column 2 is the transcript of Mr. Marley's engagement report from the May regular meeting. So as you can see, Dr. Yin gave her entire report and concluded, and then was asked by the board chair for a report on the meeting that was known to have taken place and is of great importance to the board as it relates to special education in our schools. Dr. Yin has also just taken on this role for GLASS and gave an enthusiastic report in our April meeting. Mr. Marley has served on the RDC for years, has a pattern of communication, regular participation in communication, and began his report by saying he had not attended the most recent meeting. So if you'll scroll down, please, Mr. Hamilton. In the meeting commentary submitted by Mrs. Mumford via her personal website, she offers in column 1 down at the bottom that Witt did not comment about him, meaning Mr. Marley, missing this meeting. I don't like the way Witt speaks to Yin and Wang during public meetings. From their reports and the questions they ask, it's obvious to me that they dedicate a large amount of time to schools and they deserve to be treated in the same way that Marley is. That would make sense. Only that didn't match what actually happened in the meeting in which Dr. Yin had made her full report and had a follow-up question versus Mr. Marley, who began his report by saying he was not available. And then you can see the minutes prepared for tonight's meeting. And in those minutes, they don't indicate any of that. They just simply give the content shared by the members. And this is the difference between biased and neutral communication of meetings, events that happen in a meeting. So with this information, I also want to share with you that Mrs. Cronk, because if reviewing the transcripts, other than knowing about my issue with and also led to some confusion about the language, and the transcription is obviously not clean, obviously. But Mrs. Cronk did reach out to other school corporations who use a transcript method, and she provided the following response. She's here, but I will read what she gave us. Many of the schools that responded to my question take the recording of the meeting and then personally transcribe from that recording word for word. Others have the recording and just outline the highlights in the minutes. One school corporation uses an Olympus digital recorder with the USB connection and downloads the file after the meeting. Another school corporation used an application called Audio Note and also takes notes manually during the meeting. No one indicated they pay anyone special to transcribe the meeting. So given this review of various commentaries and minutes from the past several months, it is my recommendation that we continue with the live stream video option as well as the audio recording for our minutes, and that we continue to provide the community with meeting minutes in alignment with our existing policy and state law, and if desired by this board, that we consider an unedited transcript option that can be provided for nominal effort using existing technology for community members who may desire written information. So the motion that I would place on the table with this information and background is that we consider adding that transcription to our documents provided to the community. Is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
Mr. Marley has seconded that motion. Are there any comments or questions about the possibility of adding a transcript to the communication that we provide to our community? Mr. Wong?
Yes, I think there's 400 page transcriptions. I don't think we need that. No, nobody really read that long transcripts. We already have videos, live stream. I think that should be enough. My point is just some key point of people's board members' deliberations on the meeting minutes, and then that should be enough. So the meeting minutes basically the major function is document what we did, the official actions, and also give the whoever the readers the quick reading. Say we have 4-page meeting minutes, maybe 10 minutes. Everybody busy, they just look at it and then they can catch the key point. If they want more information, they can go to the videos. So I think we don't need transcriptions. And my proposal is current format is pretty good. First of all, I think there's no compliance issues. There's nothing, we do nothing wrong, and that's pretty good. But we want to make that better. So basically, make our meeting more transparent and more accountable, because we are public service people. We vote for people know. We vote for yes or no for what reasons. So I think we will have some high level general substance in that open door law called general substance of anything discussion. So I think that's something we can make our meeting minutes better, but not transcriptions. That's my point. Thank you.
Any other comments, questions? Dr. Yin?
So I think first of all, I don't know how much work it takes to download the transcripts.
It's very quick.
Okay, if it's very quick, it doesn't hurt to make it available. And then in addition to that, I think it would be helpful to have a summary for the main points. And another thing is it would be helpful if we, for each of the agenda, to indicate the starting time and on the video. So let's say this topic from 1 hour, 10 minutes, something like that. And so, for people, whoever want to see the original meeting and video, they can just go to the particular session rather than, look around to find the right spot. Another thing is for clarification, because once again, you talk about that I missed the glass meeting. And after that incident, and I communicated with Dr. Greiner, it turned out I was not added to their Google Calendar for that meeting. And yes, I did miss an email, like a reminder for that meeting, but at the same time, for the first meeting, glass meeting, I was on the calendar. That's why I cannot rely on the Google Calendar. I have 3 accounts: a personal Google account and my UIC account and the school district account. 3 accounts all have Google Calendar on I just use that Google. I cannot heavily rely on my Google Calendar for my everyday. So I didn't see that meeting. That's why I didn't go. And,
This was not a commentary on your meeting.
I know,
This
but
was
once again, you cannot say, "Hey, you missed the meeting. You missed the meeting."
Yeah, it really wasn't about that. It was really to just kind of illustrate for everyone the distortion that can come when people communicate about that. So, Mrs. Mumford in her commentary that she distributed indicated that I did not treat you and Mr. Marley
Yes, you said that at the meeting, you basically told me if you don't want to go to the meeting or if you cannot go to the meeting, ask others to go. And so I was very lost because I didn't even know there was a meeting. And I agree. I admit I apologized to the glass director that I missed their email reminder, but it's the truth that they didn't put me on the Google Calendar because the transition before Karen served on it, then it was me somehow. I wasn't on it. And I have to say yes. I have with the 3 calendars on my account, and I do rely on that a lot.
It's, emails and calendars are very difficult. I agree with you. I asked about the glass meeting in our meeting because I wanted to know how it had gone, because I was concerned about it. But my concern with that is when you talk about adding commentary, you're adding someone's opinion. You're taking an opinion, you're adding it as a matter of fact within minutes.
With which opinion?
Well, I'm giving you examples. I mean, Mrs. Mumford provides us with her commentary, so we don't have to speculate about what one's commentary would be. It's provided. So that's really the issue. Mr. Hamilton, would you scroll back up, please? So in this page, this is what I illustrated. This is what actually transpired off of the transcript, right? And so in blue is the report you gave, and in green is what I asked you, and in blue you said I wasn't able to be there. Those are just the facts of what you said in a public meeting. I didn't make anything up there. I reduced some of the timestamps so it would fit. Next to that was my communication with Mr. Marley, and his comment that he was unable to go. So Mr. Marley and you both missed a meeting in the month. The difference is he announced it at the beginning of his report, and I asked you about yours. But Mr. Hamilton, if you'll scroll back down, when we look at what commentary looks like on that, the commentary that Mrs. Mumford has presented is that I was somehow unfair to you because I asked your opinion. That is what her language of the meeting is. And you can tell in the official minutes next to that, just the facts of what you reported were given. So this is not a commentary on whether or not you or Mr. Marley did or did not attend a meeting. I understand that there was an issue with your email and the Google Calendar. This is not me picking on you. This is me saying, if we allow commentary, then our minutes are no longer going to be factual. They're going to be someone's opinion.
But the facts was Mr. Marley didn't go to the meeting, I didn't go to my meeting, and without knowing the reason for both, and you start to tell me, hey, if you don't, you cannot go to the meeting, you ask others because it's very important. It's important for me too. I didn't intentionally.
Dr. Kim, this is not in any way a criticism of you. I need you to know that I've told every member multiple times, and in fact, it is written in our engagement assignments that if we're not able to attend, we ask for a sub.
I totally agree. I totally agree. If I knew beforehand there was a meeting, first of all, I won't miss it. Second, if I couldn't make it, I will ask an alternative to go to the meeting. It's just I just didn't know there was a meeting. That's the main reason that I didn't go.
Right.
So
and
then I was blamed. So
no,
I think that's why Mr. Mumford said what she said.
Dr. Yin, you were not blamed. You were asked about what happened at the meeting that I thought you were at. So that isn't a blame. It's just transactional.
If you go back to
It's just
the
truth.
video, you said, oh, if you don't want to go to or something like that.
Yes, because that's the way we operate as a board. If a member cannot attend a meeting, then another member
You assume I didn't want to go to the meeting or something like that.
Okay,
that's
no.
not the fact. And so
Doctor, I would encourage
You
you.
guys need to just stop all of this.
I agree, sir.
It's gone well out of control, took too long in this meeting. This is something, you should do outside this venue and sort out your differences there,
I agree.
okay?
Thank you, sir.
So, well, if you agree, then, let's just stop the nonsense.
Thanks.
Yeah. Okay.
I apologize.
No, thank you for sharing your feedback,
I
sir.
agree. So in fact, I don't think it's appropriate to show this whole thing even to start with. And I don't think this is a collegial way to work together. And you basically show this up to say, hey, you are bad, you are bad, you are bad. That's the whole purpose. It's kind of really bizarre.
Do you remember recently, though, that we added commentary to the official minutes of a meeting? Do you remember that happening, Dr. Yin? Because I think what Mrs. Witt is trying...
I will propose that we stop here. So because I agree with what Dave said, it's a waste of everybody's time. I feel bad. I'm so sorry.
Well, Briefly though, what Mrs. Witt appears or is trying to illustrate is that if we open the box of adding commentary to our official meeting minutes, it's going to turn into a situation where we're adding opinions, and our minutes are meant to be a factual representation of what was said. And these slides are an illustration of how easy it is with a word or with a personal interpretation to misrepresent what happened, which is why they're designed to be factual. And I would love to see us put a policy in place that says we aren't going to include commentary, but that's for future. We're going to do that in November.
Or follow the motion.
Right.
Yeah.
So the motion that we're on right now is if we are going to add transcript to our documents provided to the community, so they have the ability to read the actual words spoken during a meeting. That is the motion on the table. All of those in favor of adding the transcript to our meeting documents, please indicate with a show of hands. Okay, that would be Dr. Yin, Mr. Schott, Mr. Marley, and myself. That motion, or all of those opposed, please indicate with a show of hands. Mr. Wong, Mrs. Mumford,
I'm going to abstain because
vote nay, and Mrs. Austin abstains. All right, that motion carries. Going forward, we will ask that the transcript, the written transcript from our meeting, will be dumped into the meeting document file, so any community member who would like to read it is able to do so. Okay. Moving on to board training. As we discussed in the May meeting, we reached out to Michael Adamson with regard to potential board training. While he is retired and not actively seeking consulting work, Mr. Adamson reported that he has enjoyed working with West Lafayette over the years and is willing to work with us for training at a rate of $450 plus mileage. We anticipate that would be for a 2 to 3 hour session. The individual members of the board would need to be open-minded and willing to engage in efforts for growth and change. With this information regarding the additional training opportunity, are the members of the board interested in pursuing training with Mr. Adamson? Is my question, and that is a verbal item. We are not voting on that. The question is just if you would like us to get additional information about that training.
That's good.
Anybody interested in pursuing that with Mr. Adamson? Mrs. Mumford?
I've actually had interactions with Mr. Adamson. He was on the ISBA board when I was running for school board in 2020 and attended a training by him, and then actually sent some email questions to him. I do not think he's a good fit for our community. His perspective is to keep the community out of school board information. I had asked him on the topic of the sharing the packet, because at the time the school board had a policy that it was confidential. His response is that the school board should not share the information. He quoted saying information could be misleading for community members that have been following the commentary, giving them a totally unrealistic perception of the issue. When I asked him about getting feedback and speaking at board meetings, he said board members are elected to represent the public's best interest. And he said the public may not even really know what is their best interest. So I had a negative impression on Dr. Adamson supporting having a community informed, and his push was more of keeping the public in the dark. So I am opposed to hiring him.
And when did you have those communications with Mr. Adamson?
In 2020, and I'm happy to share the email with my questions and his information.
That's fine. I just was interested in the time frame. Thank you. Any other questions? Dr. Yin?
Have you tried some other people at the SBA? For example, the current board director and Julie Slow?
We can reach out and request that. That can be a little lengthier. Steve Horton is doing the training right now for ISBA. And so we can request that. That'll be, I suspect, a little higher price point. But we can ask about that.
Can we, at least get the quote and check their availability, things like that?
Okay, anybody have anyone else that they would like to get information from? Okay, any other thoughts on Mr. Adamson other than Mrs. Mumford's?
I took quite a bit of his training as a newborn member, and it was difficult because it was online and it's harder to make connections, but I found him to be very personable and reasonable, and I never got the impression that he wanted to keep the public out of schools.
I had training with him when I first got on board and followed up with it almost, it seems like every 2 years he came in whenever we had new board members. So, and he served as a school board member for many years. So I think there's value in it. Certainly open to someone else from ISBA if you feel like that's the direction we want to go. But
I would add, if you would care to have my input. that
Yes, please.
I think it would be important for the entire board to be united on the person, because you're asking everybody to come together with an open mind. And I think it's important that our board continue to focus on the importance of becoming a unified governing body, because ultimately each one of you was elected to serve our amazing district. And the more that, and I'll do whatever I can to be a part of that, to work with you guys, the more that we can represent our community that you've each been elected to do, to get to a place where we're truly celebrating our amazing students, our great teachers, and our committed parents that make this community probably the best in the state. I've told you before, Mrs. Greiner and Dr. Greiner dreamed of being here, and here we are to serve you guys. And if we can become united as a board and a superintendent serving you as a board to meet the great needs of our community, if it means a unified decision and who comes in to help you do that, I think that could be most empowering.
I agree. All right, so the answer is I'll go get more information. Any other comments before we move on to the next item?
Can I ask, is there anybody here that would be opposed if there is someone currently with ISBA to looking and considering that option, or is that option in itself not healthy? Okay.
Okay. All right, moving on to request for public comment discussion, and Mr. Wong.
Yes, a little bit of background regarding these public comments. So back to last year, 2022, there's General Assembly have a legal open door. They have some additional code regarding specifically for school board to allow the community members come to the board member, have visual word comments, public comments time. And in that code, they say the school board can adopt some reasonable rules to regulate these public comments things. It's basically what time, say how many times, how long, 3 minutes or something, or where you do it, and also the manners, decent manners. And recently, the public access public access counselor, or PAC. So they have several cases over there. That means how they interpret these so-called reasonable rules. So they say you can set out time, place, and manners, but there's one thing they think is not a reasonable rule, is limited the public comments only on this agenda item. So my suggestion is, say for example, let's use this current agenda item number 4. So communication from the audience. So we have some limitations here, basically limited the public comments on the current agenda items. So I think we may be better off to remove that limitation, so we can allow our board member, the community members to have public comments. And I think the PAC have several arguments to support this their decisions. I think we did pretty good, but I mean, in my opinion, we run school. We don't need, we can argue with them, but why bother? So easily do that, just proactively remove this, we'll be better off. So that's one thing. Another thing is, they also require the public comment before any so-called final action. So when you say final action in the open door law, that means vote. So that's another a suggestion. I would say move these communications from the audience into the first thing before we do anything, before we do any vote. So that will be another suggestions I have. I mean, the first thing, another thing I need to clarify is our agenda is pretty good. I think we have a pretty good agenda. We balance the efficient, and also we allow the opportunities at the beginning, end of the meeting for public comments. So I totally agree with Ms. Wade, and also agree with Mr. Marley. We did allow a lot of opportunities for public comments. This agenda is pretty good, but again, as I said, we can make that better. So that's two suggestions I have on these agenda things. So thank you. That's my information.
All right,
Oh yeah,
thank
another
you.
thing. Sorry, I just want to add another thing. I mean, other than these things, the most important for us, for our board, I mean, we were better off we allowed the public comments before we do any business. Because we are select public service people, so we serve our communities. So we want to create an open and welcoming environment. So any people come here, they can share their challenge they're facing, their concerns, their achievement, or something they want to share to us. So we can take them and then we can serve them better. So that's the point. Thank you.
Okay, so just to be clear, we do offer currently 2 opportunities for communication from the audience. We do that routine business where we approve our meeting minutes. That is part of policy. That is the first thing that we are to do in our meeting. And then we have communication from the audience immediately after. I would offer you the distinction that there are no new decisions being made in the minutes. If the meetings are a recording of transactions that happened, any corrections to them would be typographical in nature or order in nature. Perhaps some words were switched around, maybe that type of thing. Generally speaking, there's no change in action based on the minutes. The minutes are just the recording of actions already taken. So those are within the board's purview to just review and approve those typically. So then members of the community could stand up and speak with us on any item listed in the new business section of our agenda. And then they also would hear any information to the board. They would hear any board and superintendent reports. So any other content or new information presented to the board. And then they could choose to speak up on any non-agenda items. So that would be anything else of interest that you note that they might want to speak with us about. So our current structure would seem to be what you're asking for. I'm not sure that I understand the difference in what you're asking for, unless it is to move communication from the audience before our meeting minutes. Is that?
Yes. Move this, for example, let's use this as example. So basically we moved item 4, communications from the audience, to before the item number 2, routine business. So basically what the new code say, we should allow, let me read that, I just have this here. However, let me read this sentence. However, the taking of oral public comments on a topic must occur before the governing body taking final actions on the topic. So when you say final actions, there's specifically detailed definitions in the open door law, which means the voting. So basically, item 2, routine business, we have, for example, for tonight's meeting, we have 4 votes here, right? approve the agenda, approve the meeting minutes before we came to the first opportunity for communications from the audience. So I think probably we will be better off to move that on top of the meeting. Again, I'm not saying we have anything wrong or this legal compliance issue. We just think we have pretty good agenda, but we can make that better.
So
That's
what
my
you
point.
are hoping to do is move the agenda item of communication from the audience ahead of our minutes so that the community could comment upon actions already taken.
No,
The minutes are recordings of actions already taken. There are no new decisions in minutes.
yes, but we do approve that. We vote for that, the meeting minutes. That's the final action.
The final action happened in the meeting before. This is like reading the table of contents, but
No, no.
it doesn't need to be my opinion. Does anyone else have any thoughts on this change to the agenda?
Are you suggesting we not take comment at the end of the meeting or still have 2 opportunities, but they can talk about whatever they want either time?
Just,
Right now, we have 2 opportunities.
yes, we already have, no problem, we already have. We just want this at the beginning, before we do any business, we want the public comments on that. And then when you say the approve meeting minutes, that's action, that's final action. We vote, right? We vote for that meeting minutes.
There's no business being changed. There's no money being spent. There's no change to the transactions that happened in the meeting. They're a
Yeah.
recording of the meeting, so they're not a new topic.
No,
Mr.
no,
Wong,
not
they're all the old-
no. Yeah, I agree.
I understand what, I understand now what you're asking for. Are there any comments? Here is where we are. If you want to recommend that change, that would have to go to policy committee because it is existing policy that says that the minutes are the first vote and the first action taken in our meeting. So we can send that to policy if you would like us to send that to policy, but I would like to have anybody else who has comments about this matter to share them. And then because this is not a voting item, we can just make that recommendation if you would like to. Mrs. Austin.
One of the things that we are allowed to do under the law, as I understand it, is limit the amount of time that people are allowed to speak. And if we move all of those speaking opportunities to the top of the meeting, we may limit the amount of time in anticipation of a long meeting and then realize later that we didn't need to, or vice versa. So I think having the flexibility to let people talk longer about non-agenda items because we're at the end of the meeting and it's only 7 o'clock is a good option, rather than moving it all to the top and maybe being more stingy with everyone's time. So I would prefer to leave it the way it is.
Thank you for your feedback. Any other questions or comments about this?
Just question, do we have time limits for right now? We have that?
We do have time limits in our policy
3
at
minutes.
3 minutes. However,
So
I have never
probably
enforced those and have not asked. Mr. Karpic, my predecessor, also did not enforce those time limits.
Okay, but I mean, I think we're better off, but if other people don't think so, I'm okay, so.
Mrs. Mumford?
I love the recommendation of allowing all comments at the beginning. There's community members that would like to be on public record and share a comment that's non-agenda items and giving them that courtesy. So if they don't want to stay through the whole meeting, I don't see any negatives or positives to that. We've actually seen that happen in the last few meetings where some members, it hasn't been exactly on the agenda, but they've been allowed to speak, and I think that was wonderful. So I think it is more inviting if we were to consider not just saying it has to be a current agenda item. So I like that idea.
Any other comments?
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Let's let them talk the first one. On
Talk
both agenda and
first, we'll talk halfway, at the end if we want.
Yeah,
We do whatever we want.
yeah.
Let's move on.
We're pretty flexible.
Board leadership, but anyway, we need to change the policy. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Probably
well,
we'll
I'm-
discuss.
Mr. Wong, I'm happy to forward it. I'm happy to move it through to policy.
Okay.
If you want us to review, do a more thorough review of that. I mean, we already do know that we are in compliance. I know that you agreed with that, and I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on to information to the board. I have 3 items of information to give you tonight, and then I will pass off to Dr. Greiner, who I'm sure will talk faster than me. The The first thing I want to give you an update on a public records request. We have patron Angela Janes, as you may recall, filed 2 public requests in 2022, has now filed a public records request in May of this year, requesting emails between Dr. Greiner, Rocky Killian, and or myself. The initial request was rejected for lack of reasonable particularity. She has now revised her request and resubmitted it. Some of this most recent request appears to be redundant to her previous request. However, it has been sent to legal counsel for review and will be processed accordingly. Please be aware that the processing of public records requests does not fall inside our normal retainer fee, and processing of these emails and appropriate redaction will incur an additional charge. I don't believe that there are many emails that will need to be reviewed, so hopefully that charge will be very small this time. The second one was additional information was requested and received from our Director of Special Education, Mrs. Shelby Johnson, and distributed to the board. Hopefully you have received that and have found it to be helpful training information. I know that I found it to be helpful. And then finally, I want to say that I've received a communication from a citizen who, after reviewing Mrs. Mumford's commentary of our May 8th meeting, was concerned that Mrs. Mumford made implications that my actions were somehow racially motivated or discriminatory. As you are aware, it has been my practice while on the board. I forwarded this patron communication along with the meeting detail to legal counsel for review out of an abundance of caution. While counsel found no cause for concern with my words or actions, it is important to reiterate that by policy intent, we do not tolerate discrimination of any person on the basis of race, color, national origin, sex, including gender status, sexual orientation, and gender identity, disability, age, religion, military status, ancestry, genetic information, or any other legally protected category. Collectively, those are referred to as protected classes, in its programs and activities, including employment policies and opportunities. That is cited directly from our corporation policy. So I want to make sure that that is fair and clearly stated for the benefit of those observing our meeting. And on a personal note, Mr. Wang and Dr. Yin, please let me be clear that I value your input. That is the reason that I ask for it. And that is just as I value the input of all members of this board. So that is the end of my notes. Dr. Greiner, do you have any notes for us tonight?
There's a potential preschool partnership an update that I'd like to give. The board's been aware that Mr. Marley, board member Marley, and board member Mrs. Mumford have been attending these meetings with the Redevelopment Commission board members, or actually Larry Oates and Aaron Easter. And we've been discussing the board's interest in Happy Hollow as a possible building where preschool could be housed, as that was a component before I got here of looking at Happy Hollow in the greater projects, capital project initiatives, and that didn't occur, but it's something that is the board has still been interested in, and as well as members of our central office, we continue to see value in focusing on birth through 5-year old preschool experiences. And so we initiated that dialogue to share that we would be interested in considering some sort of partnership if a partnership might be a viable option. We've also met with community efforts around early child care and education group. David Laster helped us meet, and Gary Henriott attended that meeting, and we expressed that we are working with the RDC in dialogue, or Aaron Easter and Larry Oates, and that we had board member representation. Mrs. Cronk has been attending those meetings, and Mrs. Roth. So we're looking at the financial aspect versus the board oversight versus the curricular component of it, and then that partnership with community to consider Happy Hollow as one option. We certainly would like to be a part as a school district, one for the West Lafayette brand. 2, we'd like to see ourselves partnering at some point, even with Purdue University, and we could see where teachers could be trained in working with students, and then our pre-service teachers, and then our teachers would grow through that experience as well. So we see lots of benefits here, and these are the types of conversations that we've been sharing and having as board members, administration. We even brought in TSC Dr. Scott Hanback, and then I believe, was it assistant superintendent or curriculum director, or both? Combined title. Yeah, came and have met, because we know that TSC, a portion of TSC's student body is within the boundaries of West Lafayette, the city of West Lafayette. And so it's important to Larry Oates and Aaron Easter and all of us that we look at the city of West Lafayette citizens and students regardless of the school boundaries, but focusing on the city boundaries. So this dialogue has continued to evolve. The RDC is going to put together an RFP jointly with the two school districts and the RDC to commission a study. And with that study, that'll help us determine, is Happy Hollow a great choice, or is it Happy Hollow and a couple of other locations? That will come out of this study, and that RFP is going to be introduced at the June 21st meeting. In the meantime, we are still very interested in some preschool pilot classrooms, and so we haven't determined where that might be, whether it might be at the elementary building or at the intermediate building. But that dialogue hasn't even started yet with the building staff, because we would want to start with building administration and talk and allow building administration then to talk with staff members and get input. And so I just want you to know, though, that we are still very interested in looking at a pilot class or two in preparation for hopes of seeing a bigger picture develop as we've kind of discussed through Friday Notes and or Mr. Marley and Mrs. Mumford, representative of the board, in these talks. So we will keep you posted, but that study is going to unfold here very quickly. With that, we'll have more information to bring to you. Dr. Hanback is going to be speaking at his June meeting regarding this study. And then obviously at the our RDC meeting, that's where that proposal will be voted to go out for the study, to find the right company or group to issue that study. So that's one great piece of news I hope you see, as it could most certainly benefit our community. And then the second piece is related to a question that the board asked, the concern related to, quote unquote, should the board approve the administrative assistant to the superintendent, or Roberta, each year during a reorganization meeting as the person preparing the minutes for the board? And I did send that question to our legal counsel, and I'm just going to give her 3 bullet points. She said, most districts do not approve annually or otherwise the administrative assistant preparing the board minutes. Carmel Clay Schools is about the only district that she's aware of. So there are districts out there that do that annually at their board reorganization meeting in January. And then finally, the executive secretary is one of those permissible but not required individuals or appointments of the board. And she cited Indiana Code 2026-4-1, which explains the qualifications and describes the boards, that the board determines the duties of the executive secretary. So you asked me to get that information, and I wanted to report that back to you all as well. And that's my 2 items to report.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, let's proceed with board reports and the community report, please.
Regarding the.
Sure, you could ask a question of Dr. Reiner.
It's not ask question. Basically, I regarding the executive secretary, I think I agree. There's optional, we don't need to set up that. But if we school board can handle those things, we don't need to set up. But if we have somebody help us to work on the meeting minutes, probably we need to set up that executive executive secretary officer. So that's one benefit we can have. Another benefit is I think everybody in this room agree one thing. Mr. Julian did excellent work to serve our school board. I think she feel in that role without that title. She served that duties without recognition. So I think we should make that better. We should I think that kind of recognition and title is kind of overdue. So I think we need to work together, make that happen. So that's something in my mind. Thank you.
She does currently hold the title executive secretary. It's not a new title. The only question is if we need to appoint her in that role every year in an organizational meeting, or if she just has that job.
She already have that title.
She already has that title
Okay,
and
good.
that job.
Yeah, that's if we can update our website, because right now I'm not sure, but last week I checked, maybe last month or last week I checked, I didn't see this title. So if we can update our website, that would be great.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Yan.
When people share the note, each one share the committee notes, whatever, and if we have questions, when will be the time to ask?
After they give their report, you could ask the question when they're done with their report.
Okay, so may I comment on the Happy Hollow plan? So yeah, thank you for working on it, and I think it's great to also reach out to Purdue and TSC, maybe LSC as well, and so but I feel I don't know, I don't have the exact number, but intuitively Happy Hollow is a fairly big building, so I guess most likely we won't be able to fill the building with preschool only. So I suspect we need to have some other plans as well. So in that case, maybe we can have some, like we can discuss this at one of the work meetings, and also solicit community input regarding what we, what are the brainstorm ideas for the plan, and maybe that can, I don't know, in terms of time, should we do it before the referendum or after? But I feel maybe some of the community members may have questions about that. We need to have some sort of plan for it, and it would be helpful.
Thank you. And I want to clarify one thing. So TSC, it would be the students that, for the preschool part, just to make sure I communicate clearly to all of you, the TSC students would be the students that live within the city of West Lafayette. So it wouldn't be LSC, but it would be a portion of TSC with regard to preschool. Yes,
Okay.
yes. And so I just wanted to clarify that, make sure I communicated that clearly.
Okay.
And then,
So Dr. Renner, I remember from your May 19th notes that you told us that there would be a study underway of that space.
that's what I was going to share.
Week, I'm actually meeting with corporate services, do a tour of the building, and they will put together kind of an analysis of what it could be used for, what it would take to get it to that point, how much it would cost as a starting point.
I don't recall, did we vote on that in the April meeting or March? I thought,
we talked about it at the last.
We talked about it in the last meeting. We talked about the April, yeah. So there is a service review, a building service review that we already have underway.
Yes, Happy
Yeah.
Hollow.
Okay.
And the other point I would make, and then I didn't mean to cut you off. Would you like to speak, or you want me to speak and then go back to
You
you?
talk to me?
No, I'm talking to
okay.
Dr. Yan. I'm sorry.
about that.
Okay, so another thing is to maybe we also, probably you are already doing it, but if we start to before we make a plan, we may also need to survey the market to see, how many kids are on the waiting list for other.
I can answer that question.
Okay,
There's 13,000 children in our county between the ages of 0 and 5. there's room for, there's 9,000 children that need care, technically. We have room for 6,000.
Okay.
There's 3,000 in the gap of unmet need
So then,
currently.
okay, if we run a preschool, and will that be a public preschool, or it's a sort of we will charge and the money, and if we charge, we charge the money.
Have funds to pay for regular preschool.
Yeah, right. So you talk about, we have how many 6,000 or whatever number of children who need to go to preschool, but
6,000.
who will pay for it? So the 6,000, will they pay for it, or?
There are,
So the study that the city's going to fund, that will answer those questions, and we'll be able to bring that information to you. And then, yes, we would charge. There's also opportunities for if you are at a certain level 3 or 4, on PTQ, Pathways to Quality. There is funding available for families based on need. And so that would truly address equalize the playing field of students that really need it, so we can start to close those achievement gaps by getting them in sooner as to later. But again, the study will help answer the questions that you're asking of what is the need around here? Is Happy Hollow a good place for it? Does that answer that part of the question?
Right. So for those students who are in need, actually, I think that's a great idea. If the students with financial difficulties can also go to preschool, I think that definitely will greatly solve the equity issue. And then for those kids, and the state will cover the cost or things like that.
Yes, it is state funding available.
Okay,
Yes.
that'll be great.
Pilot, because we actually have to have a program running to get level 3 or 4 PTQ in order to be eligible
Okay.
for that. So that is why we're having that discussion right now, to get that started.
Okay, great.
Yeah, and then I wanted to answer you also had asked the question about Happy Hollow, and we answered part of that, but I was going to give a suggestion or recommendation, because you had suggested, do we want to study that further with regard to utilization of this building, and or depending on what performance services comes back with, can the whole building, the portions needed in phases, be renovated, or does it need to, part of it be demolished and then build based on need, based on findings? And we don't know that answer till performance services comes in. But what I would recommend is that when we, in August, when we have our board retreat, that the board, as we set our goals moving forward, based on the information we find from performance services coupled with what we're collecting with regard to the preschool, the board may set some goals for our team to start to collect the information from the public, data that based on needs and so forth that you're suggesting. So I think we can get there through a process, but I would recommend that we get that as a priority when we do our board retreat.
Right, that would be great. Also, I think we can also work with the educational foundation and to raise funding to support the build. For example, people can donate, the alumni, those that can be invited to donate for a room or, a pool, not tennis court or something like that to make it work. And
Thank you, Dr. Eden.
thank you.
Any other questions? I should have asked if there were questions after my report.
I think it's important to make clear to everyone that we know that the current setup is not ideally suited for a preschool, and that some costs, there will be some work that needs to happen in this building in order to make that happen. So I think we have to understand that there's expense associated with that, which I appreciate the efforts to go and have the building reviewed and how clearly you've communicated that along the process so that we know what's coming. It's good to have information on which to make good decisions.
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to reports, please. Let's start with community report. Mrs. Mumford.
I'm not community, I think it's.
I'm sorry, who's community? Tom Schott is community. I'm sorry. We're over 3 hours now.
Foundation met last Thursday. Right after that meeting, the class of 1968 was in town over the last weekend for their 55th year reunion. They enjoyed a tour of the junior senior high school and spent some time golfing. Mrs. Ayler spoke to the class of 2023 during commencement rehearsal and welcomed them to the West Lafayette High School Alumni Association and encouraged them to keep in touch with their alma mater. I know the foundation is always looking for class notes from alumni of all ages. As mentioned last month, the foundation hosted the scholarship recipients and their guests and scholarship donors on May 26th prior to commencement. The final numbers for that, 24 students received 34 scholarships totaling $37,000. Mrs. Ayler would like to thank the school board members and administrators who attended the event. And this summer, the foundation will be hosting numerous class reunion tours and preparing for homecoming activities in September. It is the 100th anniversary of West Lafayette football this fall. So.
Thank you. Curriculum, Dr. Yin?
Yeah, I met with Mrs. Ross regarding the welcoming back and plan for different schools, and she will work with the different buildings to put a resource kind of package together for the new families and the returning families, and with all the opportunities, the curriculum, those information there in the packet. And I think that'll be very helpful because we do have a lot of activities and opportunities and educational enrichment opportunities, but not all the families know that. And so we kind of try to put a cheat sheet for everybody, let's say, put it on the fridge so they know what they can do at a different, in different schools for different grades. And that's for the curriculum part. And then for the park, June 18th, the Father's Day, and that's a community day for the wellness center, and people can visit the center for free from noon to 5. And also there's, I think, an elementary school kid volunteered to teach people how to play Gaga and all those information on the park and the recreation Facebook site. So people, yeah, there are a lot of very helpful information, and I encourage people to join it and to follow it.
Thank you very much. Mr. Marley?
Yes, ma'am. RDC meeting, May 17th. Nick Schenkel was honored for his retirement after 45 years, I think.
41, I thought 40. I
Yeah,
don't know.
almost as many as Lane. All right, so that was good, and we're going to miss him. We paid for a few things. We paid to outfit a utility vehicle for $9,600. We paid for a lithium battery blanket for the fire department, because if an electric car catches on fire and you pour water on it, that's a bad idea. So they use a one-time blanket for $3,000. $27,000 was paid for thermal imaging cameras for our fire department to enter smoke-filled homes, to find people that might be in trouble. Downtown plan, we're going to have a new master plan, and we need to review where the infrastructure is going to go in the levee. That study is going to cost about $100,000. So we appropriated that. We're also doing an independent study for our public safety building. I don't know if any of you have been in the police station. Our law enforcement officers are on top of each other in there, and they need more room. The city's grown, and frankly, the facility's obsolete for their current needs. So we're looking at that. We had a change order on Yeager Road construction. By the way, that's supposed to be finished this fall, hopefully, so we can get north and south in town. And the change order was $84,000 into our pocket. Fortunately, we have an owner's contingency of $190,000, so we got it covered. No worries. Let's see, that's about it for RDC, and then RDC meets again on Wednesday with this very important request for proposal that's getting carried in. So good stuff.
Is there any update on when the construction on Grant will be done? It's expected to be done before school starts?
Yeah, it is. And, they're really optimistic. They said, we're kind of in the final stages. We're doing the transitions and we got a few plants to put in. I haven't walked down there, so I don't know how bad it is. It's got to be open before school.
Okay.
That's what he's telling me.
That's the plan.
That's the plan.
Moving on to finance internal, Mr. Wong, do you have any?
Yes, I attended the graduation. First, I attended our Education Foundation's award ceremony. That's very good. I think our foundation did excellent work, connect with the school sponsors, supporters, other education supporters, and also the scholarship, the recipients. And I think we have 34 or 20 something recipients. And after that ceremony, I talked with several sponsors and also students, and I heard several stories, quite touching, and I was moved. So I think our Education Foundation did pretty good work to support our students. So I appreciate that. And also I joined the graduations, and I sit close to the band. Our school orchestra band really, I was impressed. They really pretty good music. So thank you for all the teachers, faculty to support these excellent music programs. Another takeaway is a message from our superintendent. I think that's probably the last message our graduate get from this school, our schools. But there are three things: be grateful, be humble, and keep learning. I think I already graduated from school for many years, but when I look back these years, looking forward, so I think those three kind of lifetime proverbs. So thank you, Dr. Greiner. Thank you for your admins and also principals, our faculty, staffs. You guys really did excellent work. I really appreciate that. And also joined ISBA so-called June School Law seminars, and that's a whole day seminar, quite intensive. They go through several Supreme Court cases. There's some our Indiana General Assembly's regulations, education-related regulations, and some new update regarding the Title IX and public access counselors cases. So there are several case reviews and the legal updates. So that's very informative for me. So get a better understanding of the legal environment for education. So that's all. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Long. And thank you for submitting your report to the board to review. I appreciate that.
That if you want to see that is in the folder, and I have more information in case you need that. So, thank you.
Thank you. Internal systems, Mrs. Mumford.
I participated in the Public Schools Foundation meeting. They're working on the cupcake run and grants for the fall. So that's the only update.
Thank you. Legislative and policy, Mrs. Austin.
Board teacher discussion was just a couple days before the end of the year on May 18th, and so I had great energy. We talked about open house plans for the fall and received feedback regarding teacher evaluation processes, and talked about wrapping up the last school year and beginning next school year. It's a valuable conversation, and I want to thank you for hanging in there with us this evening and for always being there. It evinces the cooperative and collaborative relationship between the teachers, the administrators, and the central office, and we discussed the importance of that relationship and everyone's intention to continue it. So,
thank you. Okay, we have one person signed up for communications from the audience.
No, thanks.
Mr. Stute would like to decline at this time. Okay. Future meetings, regular board meeting Monday, July 10th, 2023. That will be here. As a reminder, that time has been changed to 5:30. Information to the public, the board documents will be posted on the WLCSC website as early as Friday afternoon and no later than noon on Monday prior to board meeting. Video and audio will be posted on the West Lafayette Community School Corporation website within 7 to 10 days following the board meeting as well. Now the written transcript will be available as part of that document. With that, I would like a motion to adjourn, please. Moved by Mr. Marley. I'll take a second from Mr. Wong. All those in favor of adjournment, please indicate with a show of hands. That motion carries 7-0. Mrs. Julian, thank you everyone for your time tonight.